All right. So in just a minute, I am going to be debating Tjump, I guess that's how you say it, about capitalism and socialism over at Modern Day Debate. When it is over, I am going to jump back here to do a little post-game analysis. We're also going to have our friend and comrade Brent Lengel join us for that. But for right now, in just a moment, we are going to start screen sharing the modern day debate stream of the debate. So you can either hop over and watch it there, or you can stay here and watch it with us. And yeah, I guess I'm a little scattered. Was trying to do a bunch of things just before it started, but I think that's it. All right.
Hope so.
Fair enough. And many thanks to our graphic designer, Chandra World, for helping me run the stream tonight. Kale was otherwise occupied. He had some ridiculous excuse about trying to spend one night a week, doing things that weren't about politics. So I don't know what that's about, but yeah.
Well, what do you call that?
I don't know. But all right. Sounds good. So we'll probably be like a minute of silence here while we're waiting for it to get started over there. But then it'll get started, and then again I'll be back here when it's done. Thanks again, Andy.
No problem.
Hey everybody, tonight we're debating socialism versus capitalism, and we're starting right now with Dr. Ben's opening statement. Thanks so much for being with us, Ben. The floor is all yours.
All right, thanks, James. So I thought before we start talking about capitalism and socialism, it might be useful to take a step back and think a little bit about the economic systems that existed before either of those ever did. Under feudalism, peasants are legally bound to the estates of aristocrats. And of course, in slave societies, the relations of domination are even more direct and crude than that. And there are different analyses you can give of why these systems went away and were replaced by capitalism. And to be clear, real history is always messy and complicated and multi-causal. So I don't want to claim that what I'm about to say is 100% of the story. But even so, certainly at least one massive element of the story is the one that Marxist historians hone in on, which is that at a certain point, all those rigid feudal rules, those networks of rights and obligations, tying peasants to aristocrats and kings or free towns, and all of that stuff became a hindrance to the development of the forces of production. What does that mean? Very roughly, the idea is that in traditional agrarian societies, those feudal structures were important to keep the peasants in their place while they did the backbreaking work of growing and harvesting crops on a day-to-day basis. As technology progressed, though, and society became increasingly complex and increasingly industrialized, what factory owners needed was a labor force that was what Karl Marx called doubly free. What does that mean to be doubly free? That they weren't bound by feudal obligations to a particular state, so they were free to move around and make contracts with any employers. That's the first kind of freedom. But also that they were free in the sense of being free from any means of supporting themselves except for agreeing to go to work at the kind of early factories that William Blake called dark satanic mills. Even in the heartland of capitalism in England, that was only possible through a bloody and violent process of enclosure, whereby peasants were driven off their lands. They had no choice but to go to work in factories. And of course, in much of the rest of the world, colonialism operated like a bigger and bloodier version of the same idea. Now, as violent and oppressive as this process was, in some very real ways, the advent of capitalism was a massive step forward in terms of both human prosperity and human freedom. That's what the first few pages of the Communist Manifesto are all about, is essentially prose poetry about that exact point. Once those feudal shackles were torn off the economy, the forces of production developed so wildly that they created at least the possibility of a world where everyone's material needs could be met. And while the justifying ideology of feudalism was a narrow heresy-hunting version of Christianity, where everyone was supposed to obey both kings and priests because they were representatives of God, the justifying ideology of at least the best versions of capitalism has been a kind of enlightened secular pluralism. That's obviously an improvement. But what socialists have always pointed out is that the kind of freedom and the kind of democracy that's compatible with capitalism both come in with severe built-in limitations. That's true in the political sphere because the wealthy capitalists are obviously going to exert more political influence than ordinary workers. And it's true on an even deeper level in the workplace. Under capitalism, freedom and democracy both largely come to an abrupt halt for the majority of the population they spend at work. During those hours, most people have to take orders from unelected bosses, and depending on what kind of job you have, that can involve a level of control that goes beyond what even most totalitarian dictators demand of their subjects in most contexts. When you go to the bathroom, it's up to the boss. When you have to smile, is up to the boss. And it's only 8 hours because of past workers' struggles, because of the natural tendency of capitalist markets to reduce workers to total powerlessness, to what Marx called appendages of flesh to machines of steel, was counteracted to some extent by the efforts of labor unions and the regulatory state. Another problem with capitalism is that while it does allow the productive forces of society to be developed to the point where there's a lot to go around, in practice, it comes around in just a wildly and grotesquely unequal fashion. Even in the United States, the average CEO makes hundreds of times as much as the average worker, never mind the kind of differences that exist in capitalist societies, less hindered by labor unions and the regulatory state. Look at Brazil or Haiti or Honduras to get some sense of what that can be like. Even in the United States, some people can fly around the world to be cared for by the best doctors and the best clinics when they get sick. And other people die because they're diabetics and the GoFundMes they started to buy insulin weren't fully funded. Of course, some people who are born at the bottom end of the economic hierarchy do end up being upwardly mobile and ascend into a different class position, but it's structurally impossible, given capitalist ownership relations, for everyone to be upwardly mobile. If everyone was upwardly mobile, there'd be no one left to grow the food or stock the shelves of grocery stores, and we'd all starve to death. To meaningfully empower the great mass of the population, you need to change the system. So, what would that look like? I don't think the kind of top-down state command economy that existed in the Soviet Union is a good model. It was often economically dysfunctional in at least some important ways, and it was held together by denying people important rights. But rejecting the idea of any kind of alternative to capitalism, because the problems with that alternative would be ridiculous. That would be like saying that one proposed course of treatment isn't promising, so you should just give up and let the cancer spread through the patient's body. Instead of either giving control of the economic machine to a tiny handful of state bureaucrats or a tiny handful of wealthy capitalists, the goals of human flourishing and human freedom can best be served by finding ways to create a society that's more democratic rather than less democratic than the one we live in right now. Figuring out exactly what such a society could look like in practice is difficult, but we can find elements that have been beta tested under capitalism that could be put together to come up with a system that does away with the need for capitalists. We can look at successful worker cooperatives like Spain's Mondragon Corporation. We can look at democratic governments that have nationalized key industries and successfully run them in the public interest, like the healthcare sector in Britain, for evidence that we don't need to divide society into a class of workers, a class of capitalists, to have a functioning economy. Now, we could argue more about the details of what that could look like later on, but I just want to make one last point here, because that if you want to argue that capitalism is better than what existed before capitalism, or that some proposed alternatives to capitalism are flawed, hey, we agree. But if you want to give me any reason at all to accept the counsel of despair that says that capitalism is the best that humanity can possibly do, all your work is still ahead of you.
You got it. Thank you very much, Ben, for that opening statement. And want to let you know, folks, if it's your first time here, welcome to Modern Day Debate. I'm your host, James Coons, and we are a neutral platform hosting debates on science, religion, and politics. And we hope you feel welcome no matter what walk of life you are from. We're glad you're here. And with that, we're going to kick it over to Tom. Thanks so much. Tom, the floor is all yours.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, Ben, I'm hearing like a little echo from you. I don't know what that is. I think it's picking up two of your mics or something.
Oh, it wasn't just me then. I wasn't sure if it was just my imagination. I did hear that too, Ben. There might be, I think about halfway through your opening, I didn't want to interrupt because it was subtle, but there is a bit of an echo, and halfway through, just at the same time the echo started, there was kind of, your volume seemed to change.
Yeah, it seemed like it changed mics, changed to a different mic.
It's at least subtle, so that's why I kind of let it go for the opening in case it was in case anybody else could even hear it. But we'll kick it over to Tom for your open. It's at least subtle, so that's why I kind of let it go for the opening in case it was in case anybody else could even hear it. But we'll kick it over to Tom for your opening, and then we'll bring it into open conversation. So thanks so much. The floor is all yours, Tom.
All right, so if people want to start worker co-ops, that's totally fine, and it's already an option in capitalist systems. Like, capitalism doesn't stop you from creating a worker co-op, but people don't want to do that. People who start businesses don't want to start a worker co-op. They have the option, they choose not to. So the only way to institute a socialist government is by government force, because people aren't going to do it on their own because they don't want to, and that's wrong. If you want to have the option of worker co-ops, which I think is a good thing, we already have that under capitalism. So the question here is, what exactly are you arguing for when you're advocating for socialism? Are you arguing that we should force people to start worker co-ops without their consent? Because I definitely think that's wrong. If you're arguing that we should allow people the freedom to start worker co-ops, they already have that. So I don't know what the benefit here is. By adopting socialism, you're just essentially using government oversight to force people to adopt a system you prefer without their consent, which is bad. This leads to tons and tons of problems. The centralization of power to cause people to do stuff they don't want to is why most socialist governments fail and become China and Venezuela and Cuba and all the bad countries, because too much power gets easily corrupted and taken advantage of. And so this is not a good system if the way that you're going to adopt it is by forcing people to do what they don't want to do on their own. So allowing workers to decide what to produce, how to produce, where to produce, and what to do with the profits is stupid. Most employees are not qualified to make these decisions. It's like a business that would be majority vegans in a meat industry would probably shut down the meat plant. Like, obviously, if you started a business to produce meat or whatever, and you have a whole bunch of vegans who get hired unbeknownst to you, and then they all decide they want to like cut out the meat and or just do only grass-fed or only humanely grown meat that just destroy your business, like, well, there's nothing you can do about it because, well, democracy rules under socialism. And so this is a bad idea. What if a bunch of Muslims become the majority in a country and they want only halal meat? Well, then your business is kind of screwed because that's not something the market necessarily wants. So the people who are qualified to make the decisions about what you should be doing with the company, like what to produce, how to produce, where to produce, and what to do with the profits, is not the employees. They're not the ones who are best qualified to do this. You hire specific people who are qualified to do this and let them make the decisions. So this system of allowing the workers to decide isn't a good system. I mean, we've made similar arguments for politics that only educated people should vote so we don't end up with Donald Trump as president. Democratic rule isn't always a good thing when it's put into systems. There's bad consequences to it, especially allowing all of your workers to decide how the company should work, because they're probably going to make things easier for them, which can have good benefits, but it can also have really bad benefits too. So it's not a good system to adopt in the first place. Moreover, if there is any problem that socialism is trying to solve, it can be solved better with other systems that don't involve socialism. Like any problem socialism wants to solve, you can do it better without socialism. There's nothing that socialism is inherently good at solving that you just can't do with just modified capitalism. Like I agree with what Ben said. Capitalism is not the best humans can possibly do. Like, I don't know if anybody who would actually claim that, but it's better than socialism because it doesn't have as much of centralized power. It doesn't have as much corruption. It has a much better track record in human history. There's lots of negative side effects to socialism because of these core issues that make it a significantly worse prospect than capitalism. So, like, for example, the main disadvantages of socialism is that it's slow economic growth, less entrepreneurial opportunity and competition, the lack of motivation by individuals, lesser rewards, it creates distorted and absent price signals, results in reduced incentives, causes reduced prosperity, has low feasibility, and has negative social and political effects. And we can see this by just looking at the majority of socialist countries throughout history. Like if we just go through the Wikipedia list of current countries that are Marxist-Leninist states, you got China, Cuba, Laos, and Vietnam. Non-Marxist-Leninist communist states that reference socialism in the constitution be like Algeria, Bangladesh, Eritrea, Guinea-Bissau, Guyana, Korea, India, Nepal, Nicaragua, the Portuguese Republic, the Sahari Arab Democratic Republic, Sri Lanka, Tanzania, former Marxist-Leninist states. There's a ton of those, all of them same general area. You can go down the list to non-Marxist-Leninist socialist states: Burma, Cape Verde, Chad, Congo, Djibouti, Egypt, Equatorial Guinea, Ghana, Guinea, Iraq, Libya, Madagascar, Mali, Senegal, Sierra Leone, Sudan, Syria, Tunisia, Zambia. Current states with governing communist or socialist parties: Algeria, Angola, Argentina, Bangladesh, Barbados, Bolivia, Congo, Djibouti, et cetera, et cetera. Like, notice that I haven't said any of the good countries in this list. Like, none of the good countries are on this list. All of the good countries that are usually falsely attributed to be socialist are actually mixed economies. So Norway, Denmark, Ireland, Netherlands, Brazil, Italy, France, UK, Germany, all mixed economies, just like the US is. The US is a mixed economy also, and mixed economies maintain a private ownership of control of the means of production. And none of these mixed economies have a majority socialist parties in government because nobody in those countries wants socialist parties in power. This is not a thing that people want. Just for those who don't know the difference, in market socialism, prices are determined by the government, and the goal is to achieve market equilibrium, while in a mixed economy, prices are determined by the market shifts, although the government can intervene to protect the citizens to prevent economic inequalities. Mixed economies and market socialism mainly differ in the degree of interference of the government in economic sphere. The government plays a bigger role in market socialism, while it mainly acts as a safety net in the case of mixed economies. Moreover, private property is protected in mixed economies where common cooperative public ownership remains one of the main features of market socialism. Both systems allow for competitive competition among enterprises, but in market socialism, firms are not, or in very few cases, privately owned. So, in essentially, we can already do socialism. We can already have co-ops in a capitalist system. People just don't choose to do it. So what is the means by which you're going to adopt this system? It seems like you have to use government power to force people to adopt this because they just don't want it. And doing that causes a centralization of power, which leads to the downfall of essentially every socialist government that has ever existed, because it's so easy to corrupt. So it's not a very well-ordered system. It doesn't have a good track record of success. In theory, it's a great theory. Like, I think that giving everybody more rights and more freedoms is a great thing, but there's a limit to your ability to do this in a pragmatic way that doesn't cause the collapse of the economy. And that is something that we just don't have the ability to overcome yet. So maybe in the future, when we have our AI overlords and they can just solve everything, then we can all become communist socialist pandas and the AI takes care of us. Totally fine. I'm pro-socialism once we have AI overlords. But since humans have to do the ruling currently, we need some kind of a system that can mitigate humans to some extent, and giving all the power to government is not a good way to do that. So my question to Ben would be, is what things can socialism solve which can't be solved in a better way without the problems associated with socialism? Because I think there aren't any. I think that anything you could do with socialism can be done better without socialism.
You got it. We will jump into open conversation. Want to let you know, folks, we are absolute.
Sorry, James, that I thought we were going to do the same time since with humor, you said.
Oh, you're right.
What?
I
There's
am
more.
totally wrong about that. So we do have timed rebuttals. And so, Ben, forgive me. I am totally dropped the ball on that in terms of putting a post-it to remind myself. How long were the rebuttals?
10 minutes.
You got it. Thanks so much, Ben. Sorry about that. And so we will kick it over to Ben for that rebuttal, and want to let you know, folks, we are absolutely thrilled about many more juicy upcoming debates here, including, folks, it's going to be a juicy one. We are bringing back Flat Earth tomorrow night, so don't miss it with Fight the Flat Earth. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button and that notification bell. That way you don't miss it live. So with that, thanks so much. Ben, the floor is all yours.
Yeah, so that was a very strange opening statement because most of it seemed to be devoted to arguing against not only nothing that I'd said, but things that I'd explicitly disavowed and explicitly said that that I wasn't saying that. I think about half of it was reading from Wikipedia, a list of countries that were either Marxist-Leninist or had socialism in the Constitution, which was apparently taken as a reason to think that these are countries that have socialism in them, even if it's an entirely private economy. If the word socialism is mentioned in the Constitution, I guess that makes it socialist in Tom's estimation, which strikes me as a very strange methodology. I think you'll find if you use the same one for democracy, you're going to get some very strange results. The People's Democratic Republic of Korea, the German Democratic Republic, and lots of other examples. So obviously, just having the word socialism, mentioned at some point in the Constitution is going to tell you less than nothing about the economic system. That's, I think, that more than enough to deal with that. Otherwise, we're talking about countries that have the economic system that was the alternative to capitalism. I explicitly said that I was not arguing for in the opening. Made a point of saying that for a couple minutes, and which is the kind of top-down state command economy that that was pioneered in the USSR and then replicated in other places. There was an implication at one point that the way that that kind of capital C communism had come about in other countries was because of attempts to create socialist democracy, attempts at workers' control of production, but somehow workers just didn't want to have a voice and a vote in the workplace, so they had to be forced on everybody, and then suddenly you had Stalinism. Needless to say, that bears no relationship whatsoever to what happened. What actually happened was that communist parties that were ideologically committed to the Soviet model long before they took power replicated the Soviet model, which was the explicit intention all along. Now, that's not my model for what a post-capitalist society should look like. What is the model that I advocated for a socialist post-capitalist society should look like? Well, I mentioned two examples of elements that have been successfully beta tested under capitalism, but that could be put together to form a society that didn't have capitalists. One is that democratic governments have successfully nationalized some industries like healthcare in the UK and run them in the public interest. The other was successful private sector worker cooperatives like Mondragon. We also got in that recitation, the first three countries that were mentioned were China, Venezuela, and Cuba. I thought it was a little funny to include Venezuela in there, especially if we're going to, say, oh, well, there's nothing socialist about the Nordics, because the public sector in Venezuela at the height of Hugo Chavez's welfare state was actually smaller, much smaller than the public sector in any of the Nordic countries, the chunk of the economy that was directly controlled by the state. In fact, the number of Venezuelans, the percentage of Venezuelans who worked for the public sector, even at the height of Hugo Chavez's welfare state, was smaller than the percentage of Frenchmen who worked for the French public sector. It's not that much higher than in the United States. So I'm also a little confused. Putting aside all of this, the Stalinist straw man, by the combination of two claims that I heard both of in there. One is that any problems with capitalism can be solved with regulated capitalism, with modified capitalism, with the sort of stuff that socialist parties, by the way, who absolutely are elected in democracies all the time, have implemented in countries like Sweden and Norway and Denmark and Finland, all of which got their welfare states under Labour or Socialist Party governments. So that was one claim. That kind of Nordic halfway station, was good enough that we can have, modified capitalism could solve anything that socialism could solve. The other claim was that it's a terrible, terrible injustice to say that as a result of a majority of working class people voting into power a socialist party, you could have requirements that firms give a voice and a vote to workers. Because this was forcing people. And of course, you can use the exact same force argument against any of the things that would go into modified capitalism. Minimum wage, hey, if people wanted to hold out and only work for firms that would pay them that wage or above, nobody's stopping them. That's allowed in countries that don't have minimum wage laws. So if you want to impose that higher wage floor on them, that's force. You could say the same thing, of course, as libertarians do about things like the nationalized healthcare systems that exist in some of those countries, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It seems like you can praise modified capitalism, or you can use the force argument against socialist government extending democracy to the workplace, but you really can't do both. Final point, I guess, when I was hearing about how most people aren't qualified to make democratic decisions. That if you had workers do what they do very successfully at Mondragon, very successfully at the cooperatives in the Emilia-Romagna region of Italy, which is to elect managers, to vote on an operating agreement, which is the equivalent of a union contract, but with no boss to negotiate it with, that workers just aren't qualified to do those things. Or what if the workers want the wrong things? Like what if the firm wants to sell meat, but most of the workers are vegan, and I guess they just can't find people who aren't vegans to work for them. Then all I could think immediately is, man, this sounds like exactly the kind of argument that could be used against political democracy. We all agree, I would assume, that that 99.999% of the people listening to this have the correct position that democracy is good in the political sphere. So, wow, when I get my chance to speak, that's what I'll point out, that this is that the same argument could be applied to that. We all agree that that's wrong. And then I was very surprised when Tom embraced the conclusion that democracy is a bad thing in the political sphere. All I have to say about that is, if you think that the problem with Donald Trump is that the United States has too much democracy. I mean, I don't know where to start with that. That's a very strange claim. If you look at polling data on most Americans' preferences about things like what kind of healthcare system we should have, whether we should be continuing all these wars in the Middle East, and a lot of other questions, the results would be very, very, very un-Trumpish. The choices that people have are very limited by the two-party system, but even there, if we had just a little bit less democracy, Trump would still be president, as he tried very hard to override the will of the voters. So the connection between Trump and too much democracy is lost on me.
You got it. Thank you very much, Ben. And we will kick it over to Tjump. We want to let you know, folks, both of our guests are linked in the description. If you want to hear more from our guests, you certainly can by clicking on those links down below. And that includes if you're listening to the Modern Day Debate podcast, you can find our guest links there as well in the description box for that podcast episode. With that, we'll kick it over to Tom for his rebuttal as well. Thanks so much, Tom. The floor is all yours.
Yeah, so first thing, Ben confused an opening with a rebuttal. Like, my opening wasn't meant to refute his position. It has nothing to do with his position. It's my position. My opening wasn't meant to rebut things he said in his opening, obviously. I didn't mention Soviet Russia at all in anything I said. I just mentioned that of the current mixed economy states, the majority political parties in power are not socialists. The people in those countries don't want majority socialist parties in power. They vote them out of power. They are very rarely in power, almost never. I wasn't mentioning Russia at all there. That wasn't the point. So I don't think he actually refuted anything I said there. So socialism has a terrible track record of failure. The fact that you can cherry pick a few cases where it's actually worked is fine. Like, yeah, I mentioned worker co-ops. Yes, they can work. Do they always work? No. So is that a good example that this is a way that something we should implement on a government scale? No. Cherry picking examples is not that. We can cherry pick all kinds of crazy stuff and claim that that's somehow a good way to judge what our government should be. It's not. The point about people are stupid. People can make stupid decisions. The fact that, like, Donald Trump is an example of that doesn't mean that it's always bad, or that it's necessarily the case in all, that democracy itself is bad. It's just obvious that people can make stupid decisions. So we should probably not let a bunch of random people make all the decisions for every one of the companies. That's not a good idea. Again, cherry picking a few examples that work, not a good example, or not a good basis to conclude that this is a good policy that should be adopted for every company. No, definitely bad. So yeah, if people want to adopt socialism, that's great. Like, if they vote in socialist parties and those socialist parties choose to adopt socialist government policies, that's fine. I'm okay with that. People don't do that. So how would you adopt it? Because that's not going to happen. Like, mixed economies are fine, and mentioning that other countries have adopted mixed economy policies that are not socialist economies, yeah, that's good. I'm for mixed economies. The US is a mixed economy. But again, this is not in any way evidence of socialism or that we should adopt socialism. So I don't know why he mentioned that at all. Kind of irrelevant. So again, my question is what can socialism do better that capitalism or any other modified system can't do without all the problems of socialism? Because I don't see any.
We will kick it into open discussion mode. Want to say, folks, thanks so much for your questions so far. If you happen to have a question, feel free to fire it into the old live chat. If you tag me with @ModernDayDebate, that makes it easier for me to see that question. And then super chat is also an option. And with that, thanks so much, gentlemen. The floor is all yours.
Yeah, so I mean, I guess as far as what socialism can do better than capitalism, we can, talked about that very extensively in the opening statement. Capitalist societies produce obscene levels of economic inequality. Those produce obscene levels of political inequality that you're just not going to have. Jeff Bezos is not going to have the same level of political influence that you and I do. Those seem to be unsolvable problems under capitalism. Poverty.
So can we stick with those for a second? How exactly would you solve those under socialism? Because under socialism, it seems to be more the case that there's more economic inequality and more political inequality in all of the different socialist countries that currently exist, even though you think they're not socialist, no true Scotsman.
Well, I mean, okay, first of all, that's not what no true Scotsman means. That's a bizarre way to use the phrase no true Scotsman. No true Scotsman is when you start out with a definition, and then there are examples that meet your original definition, and then you say, oh no, those don't count, and you move the goalposts. In this case, Socialists, going back to Marx and Engels, we're talking about a radically democratic alternative to capitalism, had talked about workers' control of the means of production as the essence of what they meant by socialism. There are socialists going back to Rosa Luxemburg the year after the Russian Revolution saying, hey, that's not what we're talking about. So you have an uninterrupted tradition. So I mean, given that that's not historically what socialism meant, I'd say this is less like No True Scotsman than like somebody saying that, you're doing No True Scotsman if you say that somebody who was born in Nova Scotia wasn't born in Scotland. It might use the same word, but that's just a different concept.
Okay, that didn't answer my question. So, I mean, obviously, I think that's false. I think that socialism...
Explanation of why the premise of your question was just flatly false.
Well, that wasn't the premise of the question. That was more like a
comment. The premise of the question was that those countries are socialist. If not, the question was just irrelevant to the discussion at hand.
So your opinion of socialism, I don't care. I don't care about your opinion of socialists. Every economist agrees these are socialist countries. They're founded on socialism. Whether you disagree, I don't care. So give me an examples. How can you solve economic inequality and political inequality with a socialist government? Because all the mixed economies do it with capitalism just fine. I don't see any examples of socialist companies or socialist countries that have produced more economic equality or more political inequality. It's all capitalist mixed economies.
Yeah, so I mean, the answer was already given in the opening statement. By the way, I know the difference between an opening statement and a rebuttal. I'm just surprised that after in the opening statement,
could you answer the question?
Was not, in fact, yeah, I already answered your question. I'm going to point this out, then I'm going to answer your most recent question. I clarified in the opening statement that what I meant by socialism, what socialism always meant by socialism, has absolutely nothing to do with that model that you're talking about. But nevertheless, your response was your opening statement was entirely about that model, which struck me as odd to just go ahead with it even after finding out that that was irrelevant to the debate. But sure. I think that how could socialism not generate the economic inequality that capitalism could generate? I think that if you look at actually existing worker cooperatives, the gap between the highest paid and the lowest paid worker is unsurprisingly a tiny fraction of what it is in normal firms, because you have to convince people to democratically vote on wage scales. In Mondragon, it's something like 11 to 1 is the maximum, as opposed to hundreds to 1 in regular Spanish firms. And the claim that modified capitalism has solved economic inequality seems very strange to me. That no, you still have in any kind of capitalist system, no matter what reforms are enacted, and by the way, reforms that are enacted while keeping the basic structure of capitalism in place are always very vulnerable politically, because wealthy elites will always try to erode or reverse those when they get a chance. But if you look at those countries, yeah, you absolutely still have a class of people with the financial means to own businesses, and a class of people whose financial means give them no realistic choice except to work for the first one. Economic inequality is not solved even in the Nordic social democracies, which are the best societies that exist in the world today because of the past successes of elected socialist governments.
Okay, the thing here, I didn't say they were solved. I said they're better than all socialist examples. So you cherry picking a few worker co-ops isn't good. I can just cherry pick the bad worker co-ops. Like in Minnesota, there was tons of worker co-ops that had riots and wars with each other, that had worse policies. So picking a few worker co-ops and saying, here are some cherry picked examples of where my model works, and ignoring all of the misses is not evidence. You just cherry picked a few successes and ignored all of the misses. Clearly, that system as a whole system doesn't work in its entirety, and it will lead to equal or greater inequality than the capitalist systems. Now, I don't say capitalism has solved these problems. Never have I said that. They're just better than the alternatives for the time being. And obviously, we're getting better as time moves on. We're making improvements to capitalism to try and solve these problems. But that's the correct path, not adopting socialism. There's no reason to do that here. So you just saying, here's a few cherry-picked worker co-ops that it worked, doesn't give me any reason to accept that we should adopt socialism to solve political or economic inequality, because I can just look at the bad examples of worker co-ops and show, they also fail at a higher rate than capitalist systems.
False.
Okay.
They don't fail at a higher rate. The existing research on worker co-ops shows that they get started at a lower rate, but once they're up and running, they tend to last about as long as regular capitalist firms. It's absolutely not true that worker cooperatives fail at a higher rate. Also, the thing that you're referring to in context of this last question is cherry picking. Was me making the obvious point that the rate of economic inequality within firms at worker cooperatives is in every case I've ever heard of, maybe you can come up with counterexamples, and I think there are good reasons to think this will always be the case, much lower than the average rate at regular capitalist firms, because if you have an owner who can make a decision about how to distribute profits and has vastly more bargaining power than any of the workers who sign employment contracts with them, then you're going to get vastly more inequality within the firm than if everybody who works there gets to vote on the wage scales. That seems like a strange hill to die on.
Well, I wasn't comparing to the average here. I was saying you could cherry pick examples of both and say, if we cherry pick these best examples, you can make the data look good for either one. So yes, we can do that.
It's not a matter of cherry picking. The point is that, like, statistically, worker cooperatives, once they get started, do seem to last about as long on average as regular capitalist firms. That's one thing. The other thing that I think you're referring to as cherry picking is the claim that that wage scales at worker cooperatives are much more egalitarian than at regular capitalist firms. I don't know if you're calling that cherry picking, but I'd be, but I mean, this is
average. So I can average pick certain firms that have more balanced.
Average out every single cooperative that exists. Average out every single round.
That's the cherry picking. I don't care about the averages. We can cherry pick different ones that do it fine either way.
Exactly the opposite of cherry picking.
No. So you cherry picked an example, and then you're comparing. Well, no, stop. Ben, hold up. You cherry Ben. Hold up.
I'll let you here because this is the point. Cherry picking is the exact opposite.
Ben, if you don't understand my point, let me elaborate on it. Then you can comment on it.
All firms of that.
Ben, if you don't understand the point, let me elaborate on it so that you can then respond. So
explain yourself this time. Please try.
I explained it perfectly well. You didn't understand. That was kind of the problem. So Ben.
Okay.
Hold up, Ben. Stop interrupting. Ben, stop interrupting. Let me finish.
All right, we might have to go into 3-minute intervals here in a second, guys.
So cherry picking the successes of worker co-ops and comparing that to an average is obviously wrong. The fact that you mentioned that worker co-ops are started significantly less often than normal capitalist countries means there's a far larger base to go from in capitalist countries. So like it's I forget what it's called. In immigration in America from Nigeria, we immigrate the best examples because they're the ones who are coming into America, and so they have a higher average of wealth generation, IQ, whatever. And so it seems like they're better off because we've selected the best ones and are choosing from that group to try and make a disparity between racial classes or whatever. It's the same thing here. The fact that the people who start worker co-ops aren't just random people who can start businesses. They are the ones who have the money to do this and who have the connections to do this. So you're cherry picking the best examples and then saying, the best examples of the very few people who actually start these, they do well. Congratulations. If I cherry pick from the best examples of corporate environments, I can get a better number than yours easily. The fact that since we're taking an average of a bunch of people starting a bunch of businesses at all income levels and comparing it to the very best of people who are allowed to start work co-ops is not a fair comparison. So it's cherry picking. You're just cherry picking data from the best, comparing it to the average of people of every spectrum and then saying, clearly the work co-ops are better. No, that's false. But you still haven't answered my question. Like, you've given nothing that can explain how economic inequality or political inequality is solved by worker co-ops. You've just, again, cherry-picked some of the best ones, which I can do too. So you've given nothing. And again, all of these can be better solved by capitalism in every way.
We'll kick it over to Ben for just a bit over 2 minutes, so it's matched.
So first of all, I see what the problem is now. You don't know what cherry-picking means. So you're saying, you're making a claim that you're described as cherry picking that has nothing to do with what cherry picking means, because obviously talking about every worker cooperative that exists as one point of comparison, and talking about every regular capitalist firm that exists as another point of comparison is not cherry picking. It has nothing to do with what that means. Now, you can argue this is not cherry picking, but you can argue that the sample size of every worker cooperative in existence is too small. I think it might be bigger than you think, but fine, fair enough. You can argue that it's too small for a comparison. But what I find fascinating is that in your explanation of why you think it's too small, you are completely contradicting the premise of one of your anti-socialist arguments from earlier. You said, well, we clearly don't need to use the political process, to use the power of the state to give workers these rights in the workplace, because any workers who wanted to own their own firms just could already. It's already allowed. So why do you need to force it? But then just now you said, well, any worker cooperatives that's getting started, that must be because these are workers who are in the unusual situation of having the money and connections to be able to do this. So it seems to me that you have to pick one. Finally, you keep making this very strange claim that I have not explained why it is that workers' control of the means of production would lead to smaller wage gaps, even given market socialism, based on private sector worker cooperatives. And that's just not the case. I've explained it several times, but I'll explain it one more time, which is that if everybody at a firm gets to vote on the wage levels, though, on the wage scale, that wage scale is going to be much flatter and more egalitarian than the wage scale that you're going to get from regular capitalist ownership relations. I think that would be an extremely straightforward point.
You got it. We'll get over to Tom.
So yeah, obviously false. Obviously, you don't know what cherry picking is. If you select of a very minority group, like immigrants from Nigeria, if you take all immigrants of Nigeria, that's still cherry picking because there's a select feature about them that makes them different from the comparative group. The fact that it takes a certain group of people to create a worker co-op and like a single individual, given the option between worker co-op or business they own, they're going to choose business they own. So in order to create a worker co-op, you need to have a group of people who you want to do this with. It's not just like random person X wants to start a business. Like, I'm going to go with a business co-op. Not a thing. So there's a very specific kind of person who goes with that. Usually people who've researched it, who wants to implement it in a certain way, who has some kind of background in economics to know what the impacts are going to be and how to run it. They're the ones who are choosing to make worker co-ops, not just random person X who wants to start a business. So there's a clear difference between the people starting worker co-ops and the people starting random average capitalist businesses. Most people who start businesses want capitalism, regardless of any kind of background knowledge. Most people just don't know about worker co-ops in general. And so most people who start businesses won't start worker co-ops. So it's clearly cherry picking of a certain group who starts a certain kind of companies, not because they're not able, anybody could start a worker co-op, but because they choose not to for various reasons. Just like many people who immigrate in the US, well, I potentially could, they're not allowed to because we're choosing the very specific best ones who are already qualified in the field and they're going to succeed at a higher rate automatically. So it's obviously cherry picking. Like this is super simple. I don't know why you don't understand this. Again, and my comparison to my question is what can socialism do that capitalism can't? I can pick examples of socialist or capitalist companies that do better than many co-ops. Capitalism can do this too. This wasn't a question of like, can socialism do some better than some capitalist systems? No, my question is can you do this without adopting socialism? The answer is yes. There are many capitalist countries that can do this and have much better equality levels than America without adopting socialism. You don't need socialism to do this. Nothing you said says that socialism is required to accomplish this. That was not a thing.
That's 2 minutes. We'll kick it over to Ben.
Yeah, so it is interesting that sometimes you seem to understand what cherry picking means. You'll actually explain it correctly. You'll say picking examples, and then you start pretending again that examining an entire category and comparing it to an entire category is cherry picking. That's just, I feel a little embarrassed. That's just not what it means. But more crucially, of course, there is a structural reason why you have much more egalitarian wage scales at worker cooperatives than regular capitalist firms. It's not a matter of looking at one capitalist firm or looking at one cooperative. There is a general structural reason, which is that if wage scales are set by an owner who can do what they want as long as they can get someone with vastly less bargaining power to accept it, you're going to end up with much, much less egalitarian wage scales than if everybody gets to vote on it. I mean, this just seems like an incredibly simple point. I'm very surprised that you're not getting it or understanding it. I'm not sure. I'm not sure what's going on there. But if we're looking at other things that capitalism can't do, I mean, the example that we had was general economic inequality, and I said that under capitalism, you generate so much economic inequality that you get these wildly inegalitarian relationships in the workplace, and you also get wildly unequal levels of political power. Just saying that there are capitalist countries that due to doses of socialism that have been administered by elected socialist governments have less inequality than the United States is very different from saying that you can have that you are going to get enough inequality under capitalism that those two things that that I mentioned are not going to be the case.
So, I mean, what you said is, again, demonstrably false. Like survivor bias, you're comparing an entire group of survivors to an entire another group. And guess what? That's still cherry picking. It's literally survivor bias for that reason. You not understanding how fallacies work is your problem. Secondly, again, as I said, give me an example where these socialist countries are that you're naming, because none of the countries have socialist governments. It doesn't happen. Like all of the socialist parties in those governments, none of them are the majority party. It's not a thing. You can just go to socialist parties in governments, go down to ones not in power. You'll find Norway, Denmark, Ireland, Sweden, all of those places have socialist governments that are not in power. There are some seats that they have. None of them are the majority. The majority are mostly capitalist Democrats in lots of ways. So again, what you're saying here makes no sense. You're saying, we elect Democrats who put in market mixed economies, like, just like America does. What? And then socialism. No, it's not socialism. That's mixed economies, just like America has. So you haven't given any examples of successful socialism at all. You just picked mixed economies and said, socialism.
Okay, none of that bears any relationship with anything I said. I trust that anybody who's been watching this knows that what Tom said has literally nothing to do with anything that I just said. I don't know if he was just zoned out while I was speaking or he just decided to make something up, but none of that stuff I said. What did I say? I said that doses of socialism administered within capitalism, such as nationalizing the healthcare sector, for example, have led to enormous human progress when those have been implemented. And it is just a historical fact that they were largely implemented by elected Socialist Party and Labor Party governments in those countries, which have been in and out of power in many of those countries for a long time. And quite recently, that those have made those societies more livable. I did not claim, and in fact, I said the opposite of the claim that those were socialist countries. The claim that I've made is that we can look at elements that are that have been successfully beta tested under capitalism, namely democratic governments successfully nationalizing certain sectors of the economy, operating in the public interest, namely successful worker cooperatives, and see that it is in fact quite possible to have a society that doesn't have capitalists with a functioning economy. The fact that we don't have one that's fully achieved that yet, not because they tried and it was unsuccessful, but just because they haven't gotten there politically, is neither here nor there. I mean, if we were arguing at a point in history when no democratic republics existed yet, all you had was maybe a certain amount of constitutional monarchy, but with the king still holding lots of power, you could say, aha, no successful constitutional republics yet. It would be exactly as irrelevant. So you're also shifting the goalpost in a very strange way on this cherry picking issue. That you're talking about survivorship bias here, which is a different claim than cherry picking. But yes, sure. If you're going to look at successful worker cooperatives, then you're looking at the worker cooperatives that have survived. Just like if you're looking at successful capitalist firms, you're looking at the capitalist firms that have survived.
That's about time.
Is that once they get started, they tend to survive at about the same rate.
We'll kick it over to Tom.
Wow, you're just totally incapable of understanding my points here. It's pretty simple. Like survivor bias is an example of using an entire group and comparing it to another entire group, and that can still be cherry picking. This wasn't literally saying survivor bias is a fallacy or using in comparing cooperatives versus non-cooperatives. The point was just what you said earlier when you said comparing an entire group to another entire group is not cherry picking. It's just demonstrably false. I can give you an example where you're doing exactly that. It's called survivor bias, where you're comparing an entire group to another entire group, and it's still cherry picking. You not understanding fallacies is kind of the problem here. So you admit that there are some socialist policies that are similar to socialism, which are adopted in mixed economies. So mixed economies like combinations. Yes, I agree. Mixed economies work. These are not examples of that we should adopt an entirely socialist government. This is an example that we should adopt a mixed economy, which I'm for mixed economies, not for socialism. So you're saying, mixed economy, here are a few examples of it working in a few cases, therefore let's adopt an entirely socialist government, does not follow. Again, cherry picking a few examples of successes, saying that, we should adopt the whole thing, doesn't follow. So again, what we should do is what we're currently doing, taking a capitalist approach and adopting a mixed economy of taking certain protections policies and adding those in. And that's good. Your system is not good. All of the examples where socialism has ever been tried has always failed. You claiming it's not real socialism, no true Scotsman, isn't relevant. People want to say that, here's our idea of socialism. We're going to try to adopt this. And to adopt this, we have to give lots of power to government. And they're probably like, we have lots of power. We can abuse it now. That's socialism. That's what happens. So this is not a good policy. If you want to implement socialism, it has to be voluntarily. You can voluntarily create a co-op. You can voluntarily vote socialists into office. That's fine. Using government power to force everybody else to do it without consent is bad.
Yeah. If I were you, just as a piece of friendly advice, I would not try to run this thing about logical fallacies. I think we can compare notes there, and that's probably not going to be promising for you. But as far as the point about mixed economy systems, the argument is about whether the kind of socialism that I'm describing is economically possible, whether there's a reason to think that if you had certain key sectors of the economy be nationalized, if you still needed a market sector because of calculation problems, coordinating consumer preferences with production, you could at least have a market sector of worker cooperative firms that, if you're going to say, is this workable? Well, if there were examples of an attempt to create exactly that, we could look at those and use those to consider it. But failing that, in the absence of any examples of that, what we can do is we can look at the individual elements of that. Worker cooperatives as a whole. How do worker cooperatives generally do as compared to conventional organized capitalist firms? And we can also look at examples of democratic governments taking certain key sectors like healthcare out of the market and see how that does. And if you think, okay, these things can work individually, but when they're put together, they would not be able to work. There's some particular reason for that. I think we would need to hear the reason, and we certainly haven't heard the reason or anything like it yet. This no true Scotsman claim, I've already explained why that's just wrong. I mean, you're just misunderstanding what no true Scotsman means. But forget it. Forget the question of whether you call it socialism or not. Let's just call what we have right now Xism, what existed in the Soviet Union Yism, and the combination of a democratic government nationalizing some industries and running them outside of the market, and a private sector entirely consisting of worker cooperatives, Zism. We could completely sidestep the terminological issue.
Man, time.
True that the bad parts of the track record of Yism are just going to be irrelevant to the question of whether Xism or Zism would be better.
Kick it over to Tom.
So the question is, if we try to adopt Zism, it leads to Yism, I think was the communist parties. So the problem here is that if we try to adopt Zism, the policies to do that lead to government overreach, which then become abused and corrupted, which leads to Zism. That's the problem. It's not that they are literally the same thing. Obviously, China isn't literally just giving public ownership to the means of production. It's China. The problem is it's a result of trying to adopt socialism, because the only way to adopt it is through extreme amounts of government oversight, which is bad. So again, you not understanding fallacies is your problem. I'm definitely going to defeat you on every single one of those, hands down, without even trying. But separate topic. So again, the issue here is what's better? Should we adopt, as you mentioned, should we adopt a complete system with all of the companies like this, or is it better to take just the mixed system? I'm saying mixed system is better. Always. It's always going to be better than adopting your system. Your system is going to fail for the reasons I listed in the intro, that it leads to less competition, gives people less opportunity to grow, gives successful people less opportunity to grow their business, gives less control over the people who actually have the right state of mind to make the right decisions. I think it's going to fail more often than it succeeds in making successful decisions, because it hasn't been implemented. If you could demonstrate it has been implemented, other than just your hypotheses that a complete system adopting this would be better, that would be great. Until then, it's reasonable to reject that and to adopt the system that we know works and has been proven to work and has done an extremely well job of benefiting human life over the past several hundred years, which is a mixed economy. We know this works. We have lots and lots of evidence this works. Does it work perfectly? No. Do we have any evidence that your system works? No. Zero. Zero cases.
Okay. The thing about logical fallacies is bizarre. The couple that you've mentioned, you've proven that you have no idea what they mean. There are lots of informal logic and critical reasoning textbooks that are easily available. You can buy them. Go on Amazon tonight. You can stock up on some. I would recommend reading up on this if this is something mostly you know about from the internet. But in both of the cases that you mentioned, you're just wrong. As far as the relationship between Yism and Zism, if you want to claim that attempts to create Zism would collapse into Yism, then you certainly haven't made that case. The point was already addressed earlier that it's just not the case. That China and all of these other irrelevant examples that you're reading off from Wikipedia in that opening statement were attempts to create socialist democracy that just somehow turned in to Stalinism and Maoism. As a matter of historical fact, that's not how that happened. These are countries where there were revolutions that were led by Moscow-aligned communist parties who had a pre-existing ideological commitment to the Soviet model, and who, of course, carried out that commitment once in power. It has absolutely nothing to do with the Yism will become Zism claim. And certainly what we've seen over hundreds of years of capitalism is that these features that I'm talking about, like the creation of severe economic inequality, like the absence of democracy in the workplace, like the existence of poverty, are built in, they're baked in. There's never been a capitalist version of capitalism that has done away with this. We can look at a small local example in the United States and look at the fact that Juneteenth was last month. We just passed 156 years since the emancipation of slaves. And through that entire time, capitalism has failed to correct the persistent economic inequality between the descendants of slaves and the descendants of people who were free in 1865. It's certainly the case that regulatory states and labor unions can sometimes make progress, push that boulder up the hill of sanding off some of the worst edges of capitalism. And then, of course, the wealthy elite, every time they have a chance, will start pushing that boulder down again with austerity and reversing those previous gains. But what I really just want to emphasize is that you seem to really want to have it both ways. That on the one hand, sure, yeah, mixed economies, great. On the other hand, the government imposing democracy in the workplace because the majority of workers voted in power voluntarily to do that thing is some version which could be applied to anything that makes those mixed economies mixed.
We'll kick it over. Got to kick it over. We've gone. Kick it over to Tom for 2 minutes.
As I said before, if the majority of people vote in socialists, that's fine. By that part I'm okay with. So if you convince the majority of people in a country to adopt this, that's fine. As I said multiple times in the beginning, there's no contradiction there. But they're not going to do that, as we've seen in every single country, even the modern mixed economies. Nobody adopts socialist-run countries. Nobody adopts the socialist majority parties. It doesn't happen. Good luck convincing them. It's not going to happen. Go for it. But again, so that's not a contradiction. I'm literally saying you're not going to convince them. Nobody wants this. It's a crap system. People prefer giving themselves power, so they're not going to adopt a social system. I don't know why you keep mentioning capitalism hasn't done away with poverty and inequality. Like, no one's ever done that, and we're not going to do that for a very long time. Your system does not do away with poverty or inequality either. Your argument is that it makes it slightly better, not that it does away with it. That's not your argument? Okay, I'll ask about that later. So the capitalist systems have been doing away with poverty and making things significantly better for everyone for hundreds of years. Like, it makes things better, always. Like, the amount of people in poverty around the world has gone down by like 50% or something. The people live on $1 a day or whatever. Things are getting better under the capitalist system. And they can obviously be continued to be made better by using more capitalism and modifying capitalism to make it more fair, like the mixed economies have done. The question is would your system make that be an even better improvement, or would it be worse? And I'm saying it's probably going to be worse. It's probably nobody wants that. Nobody wants that because it's bad in many reasons for all the ways I listed in the introduction. It lowers lots of kinds of things. There's all kinds of papers that show that it lowers competition, lowers, I forget what I mentioned, but they're all listed there. And I have papers to show it. So this is not supporting your position. Like, obviously, no one's going to solve poverty and inequality. You're not going to solve poverty and inequality. The question is who's better.
Okay. I don't know how you heard me say that in actually existing worker cooperatives, as a category, the average difference between the highest paid and lowest paid worker owners is a tiny fraction of what it is in normal capitalist firms. I'm not sure how you heard that and said that my argument was that it would make it slightly better. My argument is that given workers' control, it's not structurally possible to create the runaway levels of inequality that you have under capitalism that make a mockery of political democracy, because you're going to have wealthy people who have vastly more political influence than everybody else. That perpetuates capitalism by making it the case that the majority of the population, who, as you said in the moment of lucidity earlier, do not have the money and connections to be able to start a worker cooperative, have no realistic choice except for to give up most of their rights and freedoms for 8 out of every 16 hours a day. That level of inequality, the kind of inequality where the bottom end is going to be grinding poverty, of course, would not exist given workers' control for reasons that have been explained several times. The saying that you'd be fine with socialism if a majority democratically opts for it makes me a little confused about what you think we're arguing about here. But if you say that a majority of the population is never going to support that, well, there certainly are historical examples where a majority of the population has supported it. So just to, I'm not making a statistical claim here, but just to go with one example that springs to mind, Chile in the 1970s, the democratic socialist government of Salvador Allende was picked by a majority of the Chilean electors on a very radical socialist platform, and of course, as is often the case when that happens, the United States took the view that Henry Kissinger famously said, just because the citizens of the country are irresponsible doesn't mean that they should be allowed to go communist. That's certainly not the only example of that. But of course,
we've got to kick it over.
Would happen.
We've got to kick it over. Thanks so much, Tom. The floor is all yours.
Yeah, I mean, I think that those didn't turn out so well, did they? So I'm ready to go to Q&A. I've stated my piece.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. It did. I mean, the example I gave certainly didn't turn out very well, but not because of any problem with socialism.
You got it. Well, want to let you know, folks, because I know many of you have many things on your mind. And so oftentimes at the very start of the debate, I say, hey, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss future upcoming debates. And so, as I mentioned, a lot of people, you guys have things on your mind, all that good stuff. So I just in chat hit the button for subscribers only chat. It's temporary. We don't mean to twist your arm into subscribing, only because, as I mentioned, a lot of times people miss it up front. And so want to encourage you to subscribe, be in the chat if you haven't already hit that subscribe button. And with that, we will jump into the questions. Thank you very much for your first question. This one coming in from, you guessed it, Logical, Plausible, Probable. Thanks so much. Says, congrats on hitting half-century mark. Everyone, push that like button and let's help James to get to 100,000 subs. Thanks for building an awesome channel. Thanks so much, John. And we are excited. We're celebrating. It's a thank you celebration for 50,000 subs tomorrow. So you don't want to miss that one, folks. We're going to have votes and all sorts of fun stuff. It's going to be a lot of fun, but thank you. And Brenton Lengel, thanks so much, says Tjump. Donald Trump never won the popular vote.
True.
And said he loved, quote, low information voters, unquote. Anti-Dem arguments using 45 as an example make no sense.
I mean, that's a fair argument. Yeah, he wasn't elected by the majority. It's the stupid electoral college thingy. But yeah, the point was here is that a lot of people being put into situations can make stupid decisions. There were still 49 million people who made a stupid decision there. So I'm not sure that's a great example that we should just give lots and lots of people the right to make the decisions about how a government or how a company should use what it should produce, how it should produce it, where it should produce it, and what it should do with the profits. I'm not sure, given how bad that many people are making decisions, that it would be a good idea to do that.
Gotcha. And Lewis Barnett, thanks so much, says, is social democracy the best of both systems? Guess we'd hear from either of you.
No, I think that it's the best that's been achieved so far, for sure. That social democracy, has by redistributing some resources away from capitalist profits to meet various human needs, taking certain sectors of the economy out of the markets, etc. Has been, those are definitely the best societies that humans have created so far. But I think that there are two problems with stopping at social democracy and not going for full workplace democracy. One problem is pragmatic. The other is ideological. The pragmatic problem is the one that's already been mentioned. Rosa Luxemburg's metaphor about reformism is the labor of Sisyphus. You're pushing the boulder up the hill, and it's being pushed back down again. That if you leave the capitalist class of business owners with their economic power, concentrated economic power will always find ways to translate into political power, and they will always use that to chip away at whatever reforms have been enacted so far. At the end of the day, if you want to avoid that, you have to, as Michael Brooks used to put it, you have to start taking some pieces off the board by democratizing the economy. That's the pragmatic problem with stopping at social democracy. The ideological problem with stopping at social democracy is, even though those are certainly better societies than the United States, much less what the United States has imposed on much of the rest of the world, they're still societies where most people have no realistic choice except to spend half the hours that they spend awake most days taking orders in a really draconian, authoritarian way from unelected bosses. And I think we can do better.
You got it. We'll jump into this next one from.
I don't get a chance to answer.
Oh, that's right. Go ahead, Tom.
Yeah, so I mean, I think that's fair. Like, obviously, social democracy is probably one of the best systems we've achieved so far. It's probably not the best ever. There's probably going to be more. But if you're going to make a claim that you know of a better system and it's never been tested, you have a much higher burden of proof than the one that we know is the best system so far and has worked in lots and lots of cases. So if you're making the presentation that you have a better system than the best system, that's like saying you're smarter than Einstein. You've got a lot to do to show that. And I don't think there's any evidence to support socialism even comes near what that would require.
Yeah, I mean, literally all evidence from actually existing worker cooperatives show that that's an efficient way to organize businesses. I understand that that doesn't impress you, and you think that for some reason that's unrepresentative of what that would be like in a system that was dominated by those. You certainly haven't given us any reason to think so.
We must go to the next one. Do appreciate your question. Etho Logo says, congrats on 50,000 subs. Thanks for all of your hard work. I value these convos immensely. Thanks for your kind words. Amazing. Want to say the debaters are the lifeblood of the channel. People like Ben and Tom have seriously made this channel rockin' awesome and fun. And so we want to say thank you to them. And thank you to all of you for all of your great debate ideas, folks. So thank you so much on this super positive and encouraging night. And Don Folman says, intellectual honesty is in a state of recline. Is that
that's my channel motto? Intellectual honesty is in a state of recline. Buy Tjump merch.
Very juicy. And Brent Lengel says the co-op was in Minnesota. Sorry about that. The co-op wars in Minnesota were caused by the CIA. Check out the deep dive on the Dollop podcast with Dave Anthony and Gareth Reynolds for more info.
Seems like a common socialist agenda thing. We always blame America if it ever fails. If socialism ever fails, it's definitely America's fault. Always. Never just because socialism just leads to China. Nope. It's always America's fault.
Juicy. This one coming in from Do Appreciate It. The Legend Rivs says, socialism destroys savings and investments, which which determines a good economy. The response is always more regulation and inflation, which destroys the economy. How does socialism solve this huge flaw?
Yeah, I'm just not clear what the questioner thinks that they're talking about. It's certainly not. Presumably, they're not talking about any sort of attempt to institute economy-wide, or at least private sector-wide, workers control of production. I assume that they don't think that they're talking about that. I don't, I hope that they're not talking about social democracy, those doses of socialism administered within capitalism, as opposed to socialism as a complete system after capitalism, which, as we just agreed, are some of the most successful countries in making societies that are livable for humans that have ever existed. So they must be talking about some third thing. Maybe they can clarify that.
You got it. And thank you very much for your question. This one coming in from Pigs Are Intelligent as Dogs. Says, Ben, do you condemn Mao's China, USSR, and Venezuela? Yes or no? Clear answer, please.
Well, when somebody asks a complicated question, say they only want to hear yes or no, then I'd say that intellectual honesty is not only in decline but decline. So I think that certainly I'd condemn the authoritarianism of those systems. I think that that some of them at certain points did accomplish things that made people's lives better, but also there were real horrors that took place under there. But those real horrors happened because of the absence of democracy. The feature of Mao's China that allowed the Great Leap Forward to happen, for example, which would certainly not have happened and continued if Mao and Chou Enlai and all those people had to worry that they were going to lose re-election, was the extreme absence of democracy. So if this is supposed to be an argument against socialism in the sense of extending democracy to the workplace, I don't really understand how the argument works, because in this case, we're talking about countries that not only did not have democracy in the workplace, they had less democracy overall than regular capitalist democracies, and that's precisely why these things happen. You don't get a great leap forward in a country where the electorate has a way to take leaders out of power. You don't get the Ukrainian famine in a situation like that. So yeah, I think that these are cautionary tales about the absence of democracy. Unlike Tom, apparently I am a big fan of democracy. I'm such a big fan of it, I want to extend it to the economy.
You got it. And thank you very much for your question. Made by Jim Bob says, and it's not related, but I'm so curious to get your guys' opinion on this. What do you think of the film Cuties?
I haven't seen it.
No idea what you're talking about.
Sure, Tom. Okay, next one. Brent Lengel, thanks for your question, says, Tjump is ignoring the entire anarchist movement. You can build socialism without centralizing power. It has happened multiple times throughout history.
The anarchist movement? I don't think that's a good strategy to go with, but okay.
Next up, thanks very much. Made by Jim Bob strikes again, saying, Tom, oh gosh, Tom, I hope this isn't. They say, Tom, is that chair the only thing you have left from your grandma? Is this, please tell me this is like a sincere, not kind of mean super chat about your late grandma.
Yeah, my grandmother died, and you should just send me all the money from the super chat. Like, no, it's a joke. I got this from Lazy Boy store.
Gotcha. Okay. I started sweating. Okay. Pigs Are Intelligent as Dogs says, if co-ops are so good, why not just wait a bit? People will see co-ops are better than traditional companies and will start doing them to beat the competition, right?
Wrong. I think that this is a argument that's beloved of libertarians and other advocates of a pure laissez-faire system, and at least they're being somewhat internally consistent when they make it in a way that advocates of a mixed economy would not be internally consistent if they made this argument, because as was mentioned earlier, you could apply the exact same argument to any other reform that curbed capitalist power. You could say, oh, if having if a minimum wage was so great, then everybody would just opt to only work at businesses that offered a minimum wage. You could say if laws against sexual harassment are so great, then everybody would just choose not to work for sexually harassing bosses, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It's exactly the same argument. Obviously, realistically, it's not the case that most people are going to be able to do that. If you have a system in which it's an option to be the sole owner, then even people who do have the means, which most people most of the time do not, to try to strike out on their own, most people are going to take that option. And of course, there are only a certain number of lifeboats out of the working class. It's structurally impossible for everybody to take it, but most people are going to try to do it that way. There are tons of built-in competitive disadvantages there. Most obviously, that if you by definition can't reward investors with ongoing ownership shares, or else to the extent that you did that, you would to that extent cease to be a co-op. That makes it harder to start a co-op than a regular capitalist firm. Obviously, the fact that ordinary working class people really are a bigger risk for banks giving out loans than people who have some means. That's going to be a structural disadvantage for co-ops. And all of these things make it harder to start them. Of course, again, the statistics that exist, we can argue about whether the sample size is big enough, but the statistics that exist seem to show that once they get started, they do about as well. But I would suggest that if you want to know whether most people would just like taking orders and don't want to have any autonomy, don't want to have rights at work, don't want to have the vote in management elections, or whether they do, probably the best way to test that is not whether people make the effort, make a desperate attempt to pool together what little money they have to start a small business that will probably fail, as most new businesses do. The best way to test that is to see what happens politically, to see if you can build a majority through the political process to support socialism. I know Tom thinks that that's impossible, despite there being past examples of it. But in general, the idea that, if most people wanted the economy to be different in some ways, it would just come about as a result of micro interactions, I think is a bad argument that would be rightly rejected in every other context by anybody who's not a stark raving libertarian, and it should also be rejected here.
You got it. And thank you very much, Amanda, for your super chat via Venmo. Folks, we do have Venmo. Modern Day Debate is our call, or you could say our handle on Venmo. Amanda says 50K celebration. Thank you, Amanda. I am pumped for it as well. And so, as I mentioned, it is a thank you celebration for our guests like Ben and Tom, as well as for all of you for your ideas, for debate topics, things like that. We are pumped. And so thank you so much for that support. This one coming in from Farron Salas says, we have officially hit dumpster fire status in the chat. Thanks, debaters, and Coonsmeister, Coonsarelli, Coonsin for a bruisin'. Amazing, juicy debate. Couldn't agree more. It has been a juicy and fun one. Will Stewart, good to see you again. Says,
yes, the amazing thing that Jesse Lee Peterson references. There's some backstory here. I don't know.
That's right. We like amazing. We can't stop saying it here. And we have several cliches that are, what's the purpose? Oh, when people use it ironically. So we do call people beta in the chat sometimes ironically. But next, Will Stewart says, Ben, what evidence do you have that a pure socialist nation provides more benefits than capitalist nations?
Well, what I'd say is that the main reason to think that some forms of socialism can't have lead to functioning and prosperous economies is the calculation problem, the issue about how to coordinate production with fine-grained consumer preferences in the absence of market signals, or the lack of efficiency that can enter into an economy without firm failure. But the good news is that what we do know for sure from those mixed economies is that it is entirely possible to have a successful economy where some sectors are taken outside of the market. So let's say, use the most pessimistic projection like Tom. I think that, in the future with the development of AI, who knows, right? Maybe we could have a much more radically demarketized version of socialism. But in terms of what can logistically exist right now, sure, let's take that worst case scenario from the calculation problem and say there's no way to do it without having market mechanisms, without having price signals, without having firm failure. You can have all that and still have it be the case that the market sector, those firms, are at least collectively owned and democratically run by the workers. And if you're going to say, no, that can't work, that, unlike the worker cooperative sector that exists right now, this wouldn't be successful, you have to give a reason for that. It can't be the calculation problem. It certainly can't be the history of countries that have completely different systems than the ones being described. So maybe there is another reason to think so, but I'd say at that point, the burden of proof is very much on the person who says that can't be, that that for some reason that hasn't been specified, you have that you just cannot successfully operate a market sector where all of the firms are owned by workers. Maybe there's some reason why that would be the case. All I can say is I haven't heard it.
You got it. And striking again, Will Stewart says this time, Ben, if I am willing to work for $5 an hour because I am not qualified to work a salary job, why should I not be allowed to?
Yeah, so I like the fact that the questioner actually embraces the analogy that I keep making, that they say, that this argument against legally imposing democracy at work, saying that you can't deny people a voice and a vote in the workplace, is exactly the same as the argument that you can make against minimum wage. That in both cases, sure, if we want to pretend that under regular capitalist conditions, workers and capitalists have as much bargaining power, then you're shorting, you're harming a worker by not letting them, voluntarily agree to those arrangements. If you make the more realistic assumption that obviously it's vastly harder for a worker to replace their source of income than for a capitalist to replace one worker, then that argument doesn't work. And I think that people are more likely to have their preferences met in situations where you have a legally imposed wage floor, that the effect of not having one is that people are going to be forced into those arrangements by economic conditions. And similarly here, and we can argue about what's legitimate, to be imposed in economic structures, but and what the legitimate role of the state is. But one thing I'm definitely not worried about imposing on people, is the ability to vote in management elections if they choose to exercise that ability. I think this idea that you're going to get hordes of people under those circumstances saying, no, damn it, I don't want power. I don't want to have the option of voting in a management election. I want to not be allowed to vote on that, strikes me as a tad unrealistic.
You got it. And so thank you very much for this. Alex, appreciate your super chat, just supporting the channel. And also thanks so much for your question. Will Stewart is coming at you, Ben. He's like a dog or the bone. He says, I believe I asked, what evidence do you have? Not what assertions do you think make sense, Ben?
So I guess Will Stewart thinks that if a specific proposal hasn't been implemented yet, the correct procedure is something other than looking at what the closest equivalents that have been implemented yet, looking at places where on a smaller scale or in part of the economy it's been implemented, looking at whatever precedents that you can find, and then trying to reason, looking at that and then combining that with reasoning about what would make sense, given just the structural incentives that are built into the system. Like, are you going to get, more egalitarian or less egalitarian wage scales if you let everybody vote on them? Will Stewart apparently thinks that there's some other procedure that you should use. But if his idea for that procedure is that if something hasn't happened yet, the default should be that if it hasn't been completely implemented yet, that you should just assume that it would be a disaster. That's an argument that could be applied at literally any point in human history to argue against literally any piece of progress that hasn't happened yet. And I hope we can all see the problem with that.
You got it. And thank you very much for your question. Bubblegum Gun, more of a statement, says anarcho-capitalism is the only tenable position. Fact.
I think there's more of a contradiction. I don't think you can have anarcho-capitalism, because any type you have an anarchy, it's going to lead to some people have bigger stakes than other people, and then you don't have. Then they start a government, so now you no longer have an anarchy.
You got it. And thank you very much for your question. This one coming in from Forward Tribe says, Dr. Ben, can you explain Venezuela's recent history and explain Portugal's fantastic economic dynamics in the last 40 years?
Okay. So I'm not quite sure where he's going with the Portugal part. Maybe you could clarify that. But as far as the Venezuela part goes, I think that you can certainly look at success. I mean, what Venezuela is or was at its height. There's been a lot of austerity and cuts since then. But what Venezuela was social democracy. I mean, that's what existed in Venezuela. The vast majority of the Venezuelan economy was always privately owned. There was never a point where that wasn't the case. And in fact, again, vastly smaller public sector than several of these other mixed economies that we have been talking about. I think Norway is a particularly fun point of comparison because Norway and Venezuela are both places where the size of the public sector was inflated by a publicly owned oil company. But yeah, so given that, I'd say that if your explanation of what happened in Venezuela, which I think that part of that explanation certainly has to do with economic warfare against it, most obviously by the United States. Part of it has to do with severe missteps by some extent Chavez, but really Maduro in especially in terms of currency management. That's definitely a part of the picture there. When oil prices started to crash and other oil producing economies were able to suffer some temporary losses, but then get better. I think that they made some extremely short-sighted currency management decisions that exacerbated and led to bad cycle. But the one thing that you can't really say if you're going to be intellectually honest is that socialism caused this. Because if by socialism you mean a society that's not divided into a class of workers and a class of private business owners, then Venezuela is not and never has been socialist. It's always had a predominantly capitalist economy throughout the entire time that Chavez was in power, throughout the entire time that Maduro has been in power. If what you mean by socialism is social democracy, then nope, that doesn't work either, because there are other countries like Sweden and Finland and Denmark and Norway that have gone much further in a social democratic direction than Venezuela has, and the same effects haven't happened. So yeah, I'd say that bare minimum intellectual honesty, we can rule out those two explanations.
You got it. And thank you very much for your question. You guessed it. Will Stewart, do appreciate it, buddy. And he says, let me just boomer tech over here. 1 second, the page is loading. Want to remind you, though, while we're waiting, our guests, Tom and Ben, are both linked in the description. Folks, if you haven't clicked their links, what are you waiting for? They're right there in the description box at the very top. This one from Will says, the assumption I have is, if no evidence, then we can say, let's try and find out, but not assert it will be better.
Yeah, I mean, again, you can, if no evidence, sure. I dispute no evidence. I don't think that you need to go all the way to a fully democratic socialist economy, since, as we agree, right, there aren't any examples of those. That we have countries where reforms have been carried out by elected socialist governments that have gone a certain distance in that direction, but while still leaving most of the economy in the hands of capitalists, have made people's lives better, but have certainly not transcended capitalism and gone to socialism. That in the absence of that, there's no evidence. I think that's just an unjustified leap. I think that there is evidence. I think that you can if you want to know, can you have a energy sector be successfully run by a democratic state? Then there are numerous countries that have done that. And that we do have evidence for that. If you want to know, can the healthcare sector be successfully run by the democratic state, then we do have evidence for that. We can look at examples of that. All of that is fully compatible with saying that yes, but you can't have a fully state-owned economy, without economic dysfunction because of calculation problems. Fair enough. So you might still need a market sector, but then the question is, does that have to be a market sector of conventional capitalist firms, or can it be a market sector of worker-owned firms? And I'd say, see earlier in the debate, we very extensively disagreed about this and went back and forth, but I think I've laid out my reasons for thinking that the existing evidence from the existing examples as a category does give us a reason to think that would be successful. Now, if we had somehow, for some unforeseen reason, things that are very successful a la carte turn out to be disastrous for some reason when put together, then okay, since workers can democratically vote to restore power to capitalists, I'm not quite sure what anti-socialists are so afraid of.
You got it. And Bubblegum Gun strikes again with a twofer. This time, two statements saying, quote, "Democracy is cringe. Read some Aristotle." Fact. Next, they also say, "Tjump, you can't have mafias when Walmart sells tanks."
What?
They're talking about when he said he likes anarcho-capitalism, and you said that capitalism wouldn't work with anarchy because everybody who has the biggest stick would trample over the people with the smaller sticks. Nobody has a bigger stick.
Well, if Walmart's selling tanks, Walmart has the biggest stick, and Walmart is going to be the government. Like if Walmart is selling the tanks and they just have a big resource of tanks, they could just use all the tanks to take all of your other stuff too. Like why would they sell them to you? They just keep the tanks and then just take all of your stuff.
Juicy. And this one coming in from Do Appreciate It. Zirafa, good to see you, says, why has Israel been steadily turning away from socialism since the late 1970s?
So, I mean, I think that that Israel is I think is a pretty funny example on multiple grounds as a as a test case that there has always been a large sector of the working class there that has been disempowered to a pretty farcical degree. If you wanted to start talking about socialism, that the minority of Palestinians who ended up as citizens of Israel were completely deprived of any democratic rights for the first 19 years of the existence of the state. Certainly have been systematically excluded, from every level of Israeli society. But I also think that outside of the agriculture sector, where you had the kibbutzim, I'm not quite sure what I guess I'm just not quite sure what the questioner has in mind as far as what they think are sort of failed doses of socialism administered within Israeli capitalism. I know, for example, the socialized healthcare system there, I believe, is very popular. But I think that, I'll answer the more general question, and then if it's okay, just indulge me. I do want to very quickly do the Aristotle thing, because I was hoping to jump in on that earlier. So the very general answer to that question about why is it that you have countries that have enacted various social democratic programs, have implemented have implemented reforms that arise from socialist aspirations, even if they don't amount to
short and pithy.
Full socialism, that have turned away from that. And I think that answer has been given, that as long as you leave the capitalist class in power, they're always going to roll down that boulder back down the hill as soon as they feel politically able. On Aristotle, I just say that, yeah, I'm not surprised that an apologist for slavery wasn't a big fan of democracy, but I'm a little confused about what that's supposed to show.
You got it. And this one coming in from Left is Best says, Tjump, why do capitalists ignore the effects of blockades and sanctions on socialist economies?
We don't. I don't understand the question. Like, yes, those definitely have an effect, but not literally every example of socialism was stopped because of U.S. interference. That's just not a thing. So yes, it does have an effect. Yes, we can have an effect. It doesn't mean that's literally every single case of socialism failed because of America.
You got it. And this last question, we've got to get out of here soon, but Just Call Me Toast, Plain Toast says, can Tjump explain why the socialist policies of Allende, thank you, didn't work out so well, quote unquote?
I imagine it's the same thing. It was probably from interference, most likely. I don't know. I don't know the specific case, but I'm guessing that's what they're alluding to.
Gotcha. Juicy. And Will Stewart has one last one saying, Ben, your assertion was that pure socialism was better than capitalism, not that it, quote, could be successful, unquote.
Yeah, I mean, the reasons that I've given for thinking that going beyond social democracy, democracy at the workplace, are straightforward. They've been given at quite a number of times during this debate. They're not based purely on a priori speculation. We have empirical evidence that I've mentioned, which is that we can look at actually existing worker-owned, worker-managed firms that have existed under capitalism, and we see that they lead to dramatically more egalitarian outcomes. Like a fraction of the economic disparities that you get within standard capitalist firms. That seems like an excellent reason to think that the kind of economic inequality that's generated by capitalism wouldn't be generated even by this kind of democratic market socialism, never mind what might exist in the future given developments in AI, etc., that Tjump referred to earlier.
You got it. And folks, we are going to wrap up. I want to remind you to check out the links at the very top of the description of our guests, as we really do appreciate them. And I'm going to be back here in just a moment with a post-credit scene, letting you know about juicy upcoming stuff at this channel, including some votes that I think you're going to dig. So stick around for that. But before we go, I want to say thanks so much, Ben, and thank you so much, Tom. It's been a true pleasure to have you on.
Thanks, James.
Thanks.
My pleasure. So I'll be right back in just a moment, folks. Stick around for that post-credit scene coming up.
There's nothing to it. We're on a winning streak.
All right, Andy, you want to stop the screen here?
Oh, sure.
All right.
Oh,
Yeah, just close the window.
yeah.
Yep. Awesome. All right.
Wow.
Hey, that drove me to drink. I've been-
Well, I will start. I actually opened a beer before it started, but like I never really got a chance to start it. So
Enjoy your warm beer.
Hats off to you, sir.
thank you.
I will preface this with like I personally like Tjump, as in I've had good interactions with him aside from the one time he decided to go after Black Lives Matter, in which I went nuts on him. But like, good Lord, that was the most frustrating debate I've ever seen.
Yeah, that was straight. That was odd. I think that's the best word for it. Like I kind of as soon as the this is so Jesse Lee Peterson callback during my debate with Jesse Lee Peterson in whenever that was 2019. He demanded repeatedly that I tell him where logic comes from. And so we did a poll and we read out the results on TMBS for possible options for where logic comes from. Some of the answers that you could pick were like Allah or balls, So, but yeah, no, it's like as soon as Tjump's opening statement happened, I kind of. Like I'd been warned a little bit this afternoon, but like as soon as that happened, I was like, oh, okay, I kind of get what this is going to be.
Mm-hmm.
Was the warnings in the form of why are you platforming this guy?
No, it was kind of about just rhetorically what he would be like in the debate, which is certainly new to me. I mean, I hadn't, James set it up. I kind of just went for it because it's been a little while since I did a debate on my IMDb and just like, all right, why not, right? Can just do another capitalism, socialism one, can frame the argument a little bit differently this time. It'll be, be good practice. But yeah, like when we got that opening statement, he's like reading off the Wikipedia list of countries that mention socialism in the Constitution, and and all that. Then going the whole. I mean, I could also acknowledge that it was a mistake for me to like engage as much on this point as I did, but it was driving me crazy. The whole thing about cherry picking.
Yeah, I sent you a cartoon about that.
I actually thought that was really good, to tell you the truth. Like Ben, you're a really nice guy, and you're like a very good debater. And like I had not seen you go for blood like you did on that cherry picking thing, and it was honestly beautiful to watch, to tell you the truth. But I was just like, oh man, like Ben is eviscerating this man.
It's like Jaws, and this was this dude was a skinny dipper, and Ben was just flailing him around.
Please tell me you drew that.
I did. I drew that really quickly while I was trying to moderate. So.
Oh,
yeah.
So socialists online who follow Ben, please make that your avatar for like the next week, because I think this is a work of absolute beauty.
I'll tweet it out right now.
Yeah. That was just very strange. That like saying that comparing, like, okay, if we want to know how worker co-ops work and what results they lead to as opposed to regular businesses, we should look at the average results of worker cooperatives as an entire category, the average results of regular capitalist businesses as an entire category. Saying that was cherry picking, like really threw me. Like I just at first I just didn't understand what he meant by that. It's such a weird claim. Like that's like you're cherry picking. Like if I said like Mondragon does this and General Motors doesn't, and he said cherry picking, that would be fair. That like literally is cherry picking. I'm selecting one individual example and comparing it to another individual example. But the reason that's bad is that what you're supposed to do instead is look at the best evidence you have about the category as a whole. That's what people are failing to do when they're cherry picking and yeah, then obviously I had my probably had a some PMC pulpiness when he said the thing about logical fallacies, because it's like, motherfucker, I mean, if there's one thing I know about, it's this, right? I mean, like, if
Yeah.
you're like the sort of professional vice of people who are trained in philosophy is that they're probably too fond of a priori arguments, not empirical enough. Like those are all fair criticisms. But I mean, I do, I mean, I've taught all of these things enough. I've written enough about all these things. Like, I do know about the logical fallacies. That just seems like a weird point of attack.
Mm-hmm. It's bizarre. Well, it makes sense for Tjump, though, because like his argument style is heavily influenced by kind of the new atheist style of argument, and he really wants to play that like freaking big brain in the chair who's going to sit there and pick apart your arguments. I thought one of the things that you handled really, really well was when he was trying to shut you down, and you just were not having any of it, and James had to put like the 3 minute on. And normally when that happens, like, I'm just like, oh, okay, you're going to lose like the debate of optics. But you actually, in that moment, I felt you came across as the much more reasonable one of the two. So yeah, I, honestly, like watching that, I haven't seen you get your claws out before in a debate. And it was really fascinating. It was also just very interesting. It was against Tjump, but I can see exactly why.
Yeah. Silver Harlow, thank you for the super chat. Says, actually, this is the first part. Two things. One, Tom always claims to be quoting the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, so he won't take your get a book on logic question. Again, I mean, I'll grant you an obnoxious thing for me to say, but it was also, not to be too schoolyard about this, but, he did start it. He made these repeated claims, and it's like, and it just seems, I don't know. This is also something that's like that's a sort of particular pet peeve. When I see people who kind of trot out the names of logical fallacies in ways that make it obvious that like they sort of read about them on the internet, but like they don't, they've got it. It's a little tenuous, but then they seem super sure about it, right? I mean, it's not that like not knowing about it. It's like, whatever. We all don't know about lots of things. We all screw things up all the time. Nobody can have, like extensive knowledge about everything. And, I think these are useful tools, but they're limited tools. Look at my first book. It's all about this, but like, just don't be like, if you don't really know very much about this, just don't be like obnoxiously certain about it. Like this is I am coming down from Mount Olympus with the tablet of the law. And this tells me that this is cherry picking, and and that is no true Scotsman. And like, just chill out a little bit. Like, certainly until you can give me a better reason to to think that you know about this stuff, because that's like half of what the first book was about, sort of simultaneously trying to convince people who might, kind of be, I say this with love, like, Chapo listeners who might, kind of be reflexively roll their eyes a little bit when they start to hear the terminology of logic and logical fallacies, trying to convince those people that these are useful tools, but also trying to explain what's wrong with the kind of like superficial internet debate version of them. So that's, anyway, whatever.
That's a kind of, I guess, specificity that some people are missing. Are you saying, by the way, Ben, that Chapo isn't the source of all left knowledge? Is that what I'm hearing?
I mean, I like Chapo. I've listened to it since 2016. I've had good conversations with some of those people, but yeah, I mean, I like some things they say. I dislike other things they say. I mean, they're podcasters. I mean, I'm always surprised when like there's a certain subset of people online who it's like hating Chapo is their entire like purpose in life, and you realize this is like at least 50% comedy. It's a podcast. Like, if I sometimes they say things I agree with, probably more often than not. Sometimes they say things I disagree with. If I I mean, if I dislike a podcast, I generally just stop listening to it. Like that's a way to solve that problem. But
it doesn't become a major part of your personality, is what you're saying.
Exactly, yes. In either direction, it probably shouldn't be a major part of your personality. Second thing, Silver Harlow, thank you again for the super chat, says, where was this Will Stewart guy when capitalists promised we don't need an example of fully unregulated economy to reason all regulation should be abolished? Yeah, I mean, I think I see what Silver's saying, that like this is like saying, I mean, anytime you're trying to change anything, right? Like you can always say, well, if this change hasn't happened yet, we can't be certain how it's gonna play out in either direction, right? I mean, like if you're gonna introduce like market reforms to the NHS or whatever, like you don't know how that's gonna play out exactly. There are certain somewhat similar precedents you can look at, but like, this kind of like, no, we're just completely in the dark about how this is gonna play out does seem a little selective. I think I agree with that.
I don't know. I thought you did actually like a really good job with that. I've seen you argue before, and so far, like watching throughout the entirety of the debate, I feel like you hit on some historical points that I've seen you rarely hit on before. So I don't know. I would say overall, I think you were in the right with regard to like a lot of the stuff that we saw.
Yeah, so I tried. I'm not quite sure what you're referring to the historical stuff, but yeah, I tried to like part of it is like this is like the topic is one I've done several times before, and I was trying to do something a little bit different, and I was also a little unsure where Tjump was going to be coming from. I mean, I obviously knew that he's not a socialist, but I mean, that leaves a lot of options, right? So, like, if I were debating a libertarian, I'd do, there's a sort of, there's an approach that I might take there, that I'm not going to take if I don't know exactly. But also, I guess I just, thought I'd do, like, kind of set it up by trying to, like, situate capitalism historically, that kind of progression from feudalism to capitalism to, one hopes socialism. Just because it's like just because it's interesting and like it's not a way that I've started a debate before.
Mm-hmm. Well, that was the same thing like Richard Wolff with the March of History and Destiny. It's like a lot of the capitalist apologists don't get that.
Yeah, right. So it's like capitalism sort of. It's almost like it's right. Capitalism is just something that like. Whatever Adam Smith and George Washington came up with, one day, yeah. So it's I think I guess I think the history is useful for a couple reasons. By the way, Left is Best. I'm trying to scroll up. I don't know, Andy. I don't know if you were clocking or say. Okay, so
I saw that one. I missed. That's the one I forgot to get a screenshot of, and just because I'm just like I don't know what I'm doing. I'm just gonna take a screenshot. So I took several screenshots, and that's the one I missed.
Okay, I should say that.
Sorry.
No worries at all. I should say that Andy.
He did actually pay. He did have Tjump ask the question in the video, so you may have heard it.
Oh, Left is Best. You don't have to do this as a super chat or anything, but you have. But if you just want to clarify, was it the Allende question? If you can clarify that, but I should also say Andy filled in on very short notice in a role that he does not usually do here, so he's doing great. No worries about that. But if it was the Allende question, that was, that struck me as pretty bad. I mean, I know, like, I mean, whatever. I mean, it's a blind spot. Like, it got pretty clear at the very end that he just wasn't familiar with that whole historical experience. But for anybody who's watching, I assume that there we go. Thank you, Left is Best. Why do capitalists ignore the effects of blockades and sanctions on socialist economies?
Because they like to dick wang.
Yeah, I mean, it's a funny thing, right? Because it's like, I mean, some of what Tjump said about this at the end was reasonable, right? He said, yeah, okay, some of the failures of some of these, communist countries can be attributed to these forms of interference, but not all of them. And it's like, okay, I can go along with that, right? But then that was a little bit better. But then earlier, the Allende thing again, I don't want to push this too much because I think he just literally didn't know about that. But it was a weird thing because it's he did almost seem to be suggesting that what happened in Chile in 1973 was somehow a result of the failures of socialism, when literally what happened. I mean, I assume people who watch this channel are likely to know this, but just in case anybody is watching who came over from MDD or whatever who doesn't know this, literally what happened in Chile is that Salvador Allende was not an ML. He was a radically democratic socialist, but he was talking about not just reforms but actual socialism, and he was overthrown by a coup that there's, I think, disagreement about how much direct CIA involvement there was, or certainly at least collusion in advance. I think that's overwhelmingly clear. Oh, sorry. I think your sound was having an issue. Yeah, you're muted.
Sorry. Yeah, I was just going to say Pepsi also was involved with his coup, as well as a major copper company, which I'm blanking on the name off the top of my head.
Yeah, so
I love that a whole government got overthrown for Generation Next.
Yeah, Jesus. Yeah.
And I think that was what I was trying to get at, the fact that you were on point, absolutely on point with your history. Tjump, all he knows about the Allende government is that the Allende government failed. And it was really interesting too, because later on I pointed out with the co-op wars, and I was actually wrong on this point because I had conflated this thinking about Chile with the CIA. The guy who caused the co-op wars was FBI with COINTELPRO. Yeah, it was literally a cult by the end of it.
I remember that episode of Dollop now. Yes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yes.
which I had pointed out in the comments, and I cited the Dollop because I figured modern day debate listeners were more likely to actually go and check out the Dollop because the pill is sugared. It's entertaining, as opposed to diving into volumes upon volumes of socialist literature and COINTELPRO.
Yeah, right. I think. So yeah, I don't. I was going to say though. I mean, I just read. It's very fresh in my mind because I'm working on a book about Christopher Hitchens, and so I just
does bring me to one of the comments that we didn't get to, that I don't know how to find because the chat doesn't go that far back, but I did get a screenshot.
Okay, yeah. You want to just screen share the
I'll have to figure out how to do that. This will be interesting.
So if you open up the screenshot on your desktop, then when you do screen share, it should give you an option, to, I think it should give you an option for window, and that should give you everything that's open.
There we go. I see it now.
Yeah.
And I hit this button, and there you go.
I love this comment.
Well, thank you for the super chat, brother. So I had I just, because I read it as research for this book, I have very fresh in my mind Christopher Hitchens' book about Henry Kissinger. And thank you again for the super chat, Left is Best. And by the way, crazy love for that handle. But I have, but that's, so it's very, the Hitchens Kissinger book is very fresh in my mind. And he does have the, I really dislike the way that people sometimes use this phrase in social media, but I think in this case it's appropriate. The receipts for they're in terms of Kissinger and in his role in the State Department, and also in coordinating something that's called the Council of 15 or something. That's that basically did wet work operations in other countries. That they were in touch with, that they'd given guns and money to, and encouraged, a earlier coup attempt against Allende that was actually going to try to take him out before he was able to take power. They actually had there was like a particular Chilean general that who was not even a socialist, right? This guy was not an Allende supporter. He was just like a constitutionalist, right? And so he's somebody who was like strongly opposed to the military interfering in civilian politics. And because of that, they knew this guy would be a big problem if they tried to do a coup. They ended up assassinating him. There's evidence that Kissinger and other American officials knew about it in advance. And certainly they were very, when the eventual successful Pinochet coup happened, at the very least, I think it's clear they had advanced knowledge of and supported it, along with, as you say, these American business interests. Like that line from Brent just now about the country getting overthrown for a generation next. That's gonna stick in my head. So
yeah,
yeah,
the zingers there. Well, in a weird way, though, that's actually the truth, though, because if you listen, and I've suggested a number of times, by the way, you should get Robert Evans on Give Them an Argument, and just invite me there so I can sit in the wings and watch, because it'll be amazing. But like, he did a really great breakdown of the School of the Americas, and a lot of officers in Chile were given this kind of false idea of like what the actual American dream was and what the American life was for the average person, while they were attending the School of the Americas. And it led to them having a lot of resentment towards their own countrymen, because they thought that they were holding them back from like being able to obtain this fake American dream. That it didn't exist for 99% of Americans, and it isn't going to exist in Chile. But a lot of these officers, and ironically enough, Pinochet was not one of them, really just got attracted to the idea of American opulence while they were being trained to use the weapons that the American government had sold them. So there is something to the exportation of the fake version of the American dream towards South America in the name of anti-communism that has led to some like absolutely real atrocities.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. I actually went to a protest at the School of the Americas in 2002 or 3, something like that. When I was an undergraduate, and I think they'd already renamed it at that point. It's now the Western Hemisphere Institute for Security.
The Western Hemisphere Institute Security Alliance. What?
Institute for Security Cooperation. Yeah, it's so one of those
that is the most Orwell.
I know, right? It's one of those name changes that actually makes it easier than it was before. And I guess before we leave this topic, it's two things that are worth saying. Are one, in terms of places where, I don't want to. I very much hope it will not turn out the same way. But in terms of other places in Latin America where leftist governments have been elected, in Jacobin today, my interview from GTA with Nicholas Allen about the election in Peru is up as like a transcript, and it's like I said, I think fortunately I don't think that exact thing is going to happen there. Although certainly if you look at Fujimori's response to the election, which was to like rant about communism and the shining path and how this is the battleground for the defense of the free market and all this stuff. I think that if she could convince some generals, it totally would happen. But the other one is that even in terms of social democracy, I think that you can't discount like the effects of interference. Like there's some like part of the problem with past attempts to even go further with the sort of social democratic road to socialism has been either in some cases like direct pressure from the United States and other countries to try to put a kibosh on that, or two, just the sort of regular veto of capitalists who can like move around, between capitalist countries in order to punish and undermine, governments that take away too much of their power. Like when Mitterrand, tried to nationalize a bunch of the French economy in the early '80s, which is, whatever. That's why socialists have traditionally understood that it's that you can't. It has to be a global effort. That you're not gonna get. That if you want to totally undo the power of capitalists, that has to be international. He wasn't right about everything, but Trotsky definitely got that part right. I should also, I guess I should also say, and I'll throw to you guys before we finish the topic, that on Chile, right? It's kind of funny. He's talking about in the debate. Tjump is talking about countries democratically rejecting socialism, and certainly whatever. Right-wing parties sometimes win elections, centrist parties sometimes win elections, but also Chile is a particularly dramatic example because they just in 1973 they voted for it. That's that famous Kissinger quote about how why should a country be allowed to go communist just because its citizens are irresponsible, and then just now, they just had this immense wave of protests and riots to basically have this mass popular rejection of neoliberalism in Chile, culminating in a referendum to get rid of the old constitution that was imposed by Pinochet. So I'd say that that's certainly an example where if the electorate was allowed to have its say, they would at the very least go for something vastly more social democratic than they're allowed to, maybe even go beyond social democracy.
Yeah, you talk to your average Republican. I still remember this. I got into it with my dad, and my dad's a lifelong Republican. And this was before the second election, because the first election, 2016, Trump versus Hillary. Before Hillary squeezed out Bernie, my dad, the lifelong Republican, was ready to vote for Bernie. And then of course, the second time I remembered. There was I think it was Bernie and AOC were pushing something like a 70% tax after the first $2 million or something. Yeah. And my dad had sat there and said, basically, after $1 million, they should just take 100% of your money. And I said to him, I was like, AOC and Bernie said they should take 70% of the money after $2 million or whatever it was, much larger than what my father had said. And my dad was like, no, you can't do that. That's socialism. And I'm like, that's less than what you were just arguing for. That's how powerful the culture war is in a lot of people. If you look at my dad, he was arguing when I was in middle school, he was arguing essentially for worker ownership, but he was phrasing it in conservative terms. And then, of course, we don't get close to worker ownership. So I think there's just a lot of people that are just very confused about what the parties actually represent, within the United States, and have just mostly just gotten completely turned around by the rhetoric. But I also think that the electorate is far, far, far to the left in objective terms than anything that the actual, political process will allow.
Yeah, no question. that was taking it back to the debate. By the way, thank you for the super chat, Antonio. I like that. The socialist countries are cherry picked. Yeah, that's take it back to the debate. Tjump. I think you nailed this in your super chat, Brent. But one of the weirdest claims that he made, and to be fair, it's not exclusive to him. There's a certain kind of centrist who loves this claim, is that Donald Trump is a symptom of too much democracy, and that's just nutty. That makes no sense. Donald Trump, if we had just a little bit more democracy, Donald Trump would not have been president.
Yeah. Donald Trump got third place behind Hillary Clinton and the overwhelming winner of 2016, absolutely no one, because like more than 50% of registered voters did not vote.
Yeah, and if we had, I mean, look, if we just had the system for presidential elections that like California does, like the way that they run elections there, that you just have an all-party jungle primary, and then the top two vote getters, get, go on to the general election, regardless of whether they're both Democrats or both Republicans or whatever. Then, I mean, most likely Bernie Sanders would be president right now.
That would be a beautiful world.
Like,
or at least a little bit better than what we've got right now.
All of the head-to-head matchup polls for years, right, showed that Bernie, that Bernie would beat Trump with the general, the general election electorate, because the primaries, unfortunately, I think it's a huge problem for the left. Okay, the third party route is pretty much a non-starter at this stage because of the way that American elections work. But also, Democratic primaries are very hostile territory for the left, because in the fact, I mean, just the fact, like, you're more likely to participate if you strongly identify with the party, obviously, and of course, Bernie does worse with people who strongly identify with the parties and better with people who don't, which is, as you mentioned, most people. And then two, just the fact that like those primaries and caucuses aren't all on the same day, like already means that like you have to be a little plugged in, like a little bit more plugged in to even like know when your state's primary or caucus is. Whereas like the election, if you ever turn on the news at any point for like 6 months, you know when the general election is. Like that alone means that it's going to be a smaller, more upper income, electorate, because it's like people with more free time, who are, I mean, it is going to tilt, like, not that most people who vote in prime aren't still working class, but it's going to tilt a little bit, a little bit more middle class in the primaries, and that's also very bad for Bernie-crats. So I don't know what the solution is, but it's a huge problem. But like also like the polls did consistently show that like given Bernie on the ballot, then he would have won. And certainly, like even if you take that counterfactual out of it, I mean you can just look issue by issue. That like most Americans tell pollsters that they like the idea of Medicare for all. And even if you want to say that a lot of people are confused about it, which is true to a certain extent, there's a lot of like work that needs to be done on messaging, and people often who don't pay a lot of attention to politics often don't clearly differentiate between different healthcare plans. But at the very least, right? At the very least, most Americans believe, even on the most cynical construal of those polls, if you say, oh, they don't really understand what it is or whatever, at the very least, most Americans support a universal public option, which would already be a radical shift to the left in the healthcare system. And most Americans want a vastly less interventionist foreign policy. That's totally clear for the polls. Most Americans, are friendly to taxing rich people more, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Like, clearly these preferences could not be less Trump-like. So I just don't understand this claim that like, Trump is a symptom of too much democracy.
Mm-hmm. I mean, he wouldn't be president if not for the Electoral College, which I think even Tjump admitted when I pushed him on that. But I'm sorry, Andrew. I
was just going to say, I think the big thing is that how the left doesn't actually pay attention. I mean, not to the left. I'm sorry, the centrist of the people who control the Democratic Party don't pay attention to the left, even whenever they like need to get our vote, to get our votes out there. Like in 2004, for example, Ralph Nader was like, "You don't want me to run in the general? Really simple. Here's a couple of platforms that you just need to tack on, and I will drop out." And they ignored that. And what did they do after John Kerry lost? Was to blame Ralph Nader again, which he didn't even get nearly as much votes as he did in 2000. Yeah, and you can look at every single loss of a Democrat that I've paid attention to for the past 20 years, and it's the same story. They don't negotiate with the left, and then the left doesn't come out to vote for them.
Yeah. And then they blame the left for having values. I mean, I think it was really telling. If I'm not mistaken, I think it was Michigan. I could be wrong on the state, but there was like this whole thing in 2016 where they were like, oh, it was Jill Stein that lost us this key state to Trump, when in fact they're more than the actual number of votes between Trump and Hillary were like people who voted straight ticket Democrat down every single issue, but left POTUS blank because Hillary gave them nothing to vote for. And I don't blame any one of those people, you know?
No, I absolutely don't blame any of them. I mean, I think that, look, you know, is Jill Stein my favorite politician? Certainly not. I have a lot. Ralph Nader I like. I mean, I don't think his electoral strategy, you know, was a good one, especially after the first try sort of showed that was going to hit that roadblock. But I mean, like that guy is like a genuine hero. You know, like he's probably. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I was in a car accident as a kid. You know, Ralph Nader probably saved my life. You know, because for people who aren't familiar with this history, you know, he's the reason why cars all have seatbelts in them now. You know, he's probably, you know, airbags, you know, for all of his lawsuits against General Motors and the other car companies. You know, I mean, like I said, I mean, he's I think in human terms, he's worth, you know, he's worth more than, you know, than any of the centrists who obsessively hate him because of Florida in 2000, which, you know, not for nothing, but Gore won the state. But yeah, I guess like the thing about the 2016 election is like, yeah, sure, if you take all the Jill Stein votes in Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania, and just magically transfer them all to Hillary, does she win some of those states? Sure, she does. Maybe that even wins her the election. But like, one, the Jill Stein votes are a tiny minority of the did not vote for either Hillary or Trump votes. You know, like most of those people, like you said, just left the top blank. And it's a very convenient thing for centrists to focus on. You know, because it allows them to paint a certain kind of picture of who's not voted for Hillary. That it's this is probably like a middle-class white hippie who just doesn't understand the stakes of the election. That's the picture they want to post. But like, I think
every year the stakes are the same.
Yeah, just in Detroit and Flint, the number of ballots where the top was left blank, I'm pretty sure is bigger. I might be wrong about this. Maybe somebody can look this up and let me know. But like, I'm pretty sure that just in those cities alone, it's probably bigger than the Jill Stein vote in the state, which was like, you know, which was not big. So it's like, yeah, if you make the assumption that the Jill Stein voters would have all voted for Hillary, which I don't think is a good assumption, but if you do, sure, that's enough to move it to Hillary. But you know, like, yeah, if Hillary had campaigned in Michigan, she would have won Michigan. If they nominated literally anybody else, if they nominated Biden the first time in 2016, Biden would have won Michigan. The slightest wind could have been different. Yeah, you can look at 1,000 factors that if they'd been different, she would have won. But I mean, I don't know what that's supposed to prove, and I absolutely don't blame the voters. I mean, like, yes, I'll take the fifth in 2016, but in 2020, you know, I mean, I voting in a swing state, you know, I held my nose and voted for Biden, you know, for all the obvious tactical reasons. But like, I never, ever scolded or lectured anybody who wasn't willing to do the same, because I think that that's super counterproductive. You know, like anybody with like 5 minutes knowledge of human psychology knows that usually backfires. And B, I think it just gets it wrong for the reasons that Andy's talking about. It always reminds me of that Bertolt Brecht poem. Do you guys know this about the after the 1953 uprising in East Germany. Bertolt Brecht was living there at that point, and he has this poem that's like just this short comedic poem where he says the party put up posters saying that to prove their loyalty, people would have to work twice as hard as they did before. And then the end of the poem is, why wouldn't it be simpler if the government simply dissolved the people and elected another? And it's like that's the that's what I always fucking think of with this Hillary stuff, because it's like, yeah, they, as a politician, what you're supposed to do is to try to get voters excited about pulling the lever for you. Getting mad at the voters because you failed just seems like is just ass backwards. It's like, yeah, somebody I have my opinions about what the tactically right thing to do is if you're a leftist in a swing state, but I mean, I'm not going to blame anybody who doesn't, who doesn't share that tactical take. And I'm certain, and certainly I don't want to hear that from centrists who supported those very uninspiring candidates.
Well, no, so I actually studied theater in college, so I was forced to study Brecht. And I remember that poem, but of course my professors did not spend much time on it. Most of what was transmitted to me of Brecht was, oh, he showed you all the stuff that was going on behind the scenes in theater. Like none of the Marxist stuff. It was just like, hey, he put on this bad play that alienated the audience, and we don't know why.
I only really remember him being the Space Ghost enemy.
Brecht. Bertolt Brecht. Oh, someone go out there right now and make a Facebook page for Bertolt Brecht. From Space Ghost Coast to Coast. That will be amazing. You will get tens of likes.
Yeah, man, that takes me back. Like sitting in my friend's living room, drinking and watching C-Lab and Aqua Teen Force and also Space Ghost. Michael Strauss, thank you so much for the super chat, brother. Says, what Major League Sports shirt is J. Andrew World sporting?
It's none. It's actually Jack Kirby, a comic book artist. He, my friend Craig CK actually designed this to fundraise for publishing independent comics, and I believe you could still order those. I could probably tweet out a link if I can find it, and it's some cool stuff. But yeah, Jack Kirby, when he got enlisted for when he got called up to serve in World War II, decided not to take the easy route to be an artist like most people did. He joined the infantry so he could fight Nazis.
Hell yeah!
So he's I don't know how much of a comrade he is, but he was raised by a Russian Jew union organizer who was ran out of the country before the revolution, and all of his stories ended with punching Nazis. So dude's all right in my books.
So Ben, I cannot let that pass. By the way,
I was going to say, Andy, I don't know if you're aware of this. Brent is a comic writer. He has I believe
an indie comic writer. Yeah, I'll finish it. I'm the author of Snow White Zombie Apocalypse, which is an indie comic with 2 Ringo nods already, which was really exciting. We actually have a Kickstarter that is currently running, and I will send Ben the link, and hopefully people can go out and grab the books. And there is a lot of, surprisingly enough, the premise is Snow White awakens to Prince Charming's kiss 28 days after the zombie apocalypse. 7 dwarves are dead. Prince is polyamorous, and she has to join forces with him and his badass paramour Rapunzel to survive in this horrifying zombie world, which is not entirely unlike socialist analysis of society when you look at society as a mass that wants to devour your uniqueness and make you function as one of them. So yeah, that's definitely check it out. But I'll send Ben the link. And yeah, indie comics are badass, and everybody should check it out. And I did not know that fact about Jack Kirby, so that's amazing.
Oh, I know lots of facts about Jack Kirby.
I'll stick the link in the description on the YouTube video. Jared,
we're running for 5 more days.
Jared, thank you so much for super chat. Says you mentioned Al Gore won, so I had to donate. it is amazing how much that is like how much that fact weighed in public consciousness for like a minute in the early 2000s, and how much it is absent from public consciousness now. So far, like, I mean, it is really striking, right? I mean, so far, we have zero Republican presidents in the 21st century who came to office because the majority of the voters supported them. Although at least in Trump's case, I mean, he legitimately won the Electoral College in 2016. But in Bush's case, he didn't even do that, right? I mean, the thing that was so aggravating about the constant focus on Nader, yeah, sure. I mean, Nader did get more votes than by a lot, than the difference, the razor thin official difference, between Gore and Bush. I mean, my friend David McReynolds got more votes than the difference between Gore and Bush running as the Socialist Party candidate in 2000. Everybody, like every third party candidate, got more different votes than the difference between Gore and Bush, because Bush officially only got 537 votes. But the vastly more important point is that many times that many people were illegitimately purged from the voting rolls in Florida because they had a name that supposedly sounded too much like the name of a felon, who's disenfranchised, and doesn't take much imagination to see how that plays out ethnically. So it was, and there were a lot of irregularities in the voting itself. The Supreme Court famously stopped the recount if it had succeeded. That would have given the Gore campaign grounds to ask for more recounts in other parts of the state, at which point, very likely, even with all the voting roll purges, it would have flipped the outcome of the election.
Mm-hmm. And then the Republicans would have said it was stolen from them.
Well, sure. Yeah. Well, I appreciate that, Silver. Yeah, no Philosophy Friday this week, partially because I have I wanted to do this debate tonight, and also partially just because, as I mentioned at the stream on Wednesday, a lot has been going on personally, so Jen and I weren't really in a position to prepare something for Philosophy Friday this week. Ivan, thank you so much for the super chat. Says, I'll be teaching high school economics in the fall. Excellent. The sounds. You gave a super chat to this channel, so I already know that's going to be better than my high school economics class. Critical pedagogy, political economy, CIA coups, and international investments. Any advice? What do you think, guys?
I'll let you go first.
I know. I actually had a really fun economics class because the guy teaching it was like this. He just graduated from college and was a sports, like a coach for one of the sports teams. So he didn't know what the hell he was doing teaching economics. So he just taught, like, okay, this is what banking accounts are like. Oh, I'm buying a car. This is what it's like to buy a car. And it was actually kind of useful, but I can't, but like, we didn't really go into any kind of theory or anything like that.
Yeah, well, fair enough. I mean, I always think of Richard Wolff, by the way, guest tomorrow night. But the point that he likes to make about how
Monday.
Yeah. Oh, sorry, not tomorrow night. This is Friday. Yes, Monday. Yes. Monday.
Everything blurs together in COVID time.
I had a panic because I haven't done it yet. So.
Yeah. No, got 3 days to make that thumbnail. So, yeah, the guest, or one of two guests, I should say, on Monday night. We're also going to have Pascal Robert to talk about Haiti, but Richard Wolff first. And the point that I've heard Wolff make that universities typically have like one literature department and one history department, et cetera. But in practice, they have two economics departments. One that's called the economics department and exists to glorify capitalism. The other that's called the business department and exists to give you useful information about how it works. Those are two very different projects in practice. But I guess one thing I would say, Ivan, just to try to give you some concrete advice, is there's a guy named Mike Beggs, who's an economist in Australia, who I'm co-writing something with him and Bhaskar very slowly, but he had a Jacobin article that I'm sure you can still find. You might have to be a subscriber, I'm not sure, but he has an old Jacobin article that's like basically just this reading list for like, you know, lefties who want to you know, like economic, basically a reading list of like introductory, then getting into a little bit more advanced economics textbooks for the left. So obviously, I don't think most of those would probably be appropriate as reading for high school, but I think there are probably things in the books that Mike recommends that, you know, you could plug into a high school economics curriculum, I would imagine.
Yeah, Ivan, the number one thing that I would recommend, and this is because I, as a red-blooded American male who loved capitalism and voted for George W. Bush once, as a very young, very stupid man, so I was convinced to look more intensely at socialism and anarchism by a guy who wound up in an econ program and became an economist, you know, employed by like a major financial firm. And what I would think would be really great to focus on is the intersection between economics and politics, specifically in the sense that you look at, you know, who are being, like, what economists are being employed by major financial firms and what economists are being employed by think tanks. Because I think you'll find oftentimes political think tanks tend to employ a certain type of economist, Austrians, whereas, you know, actual, you know, financial institutions that are interested in how the economy works tend to look much more at the neoclassical school and at behavioral economics. So the politicization of economics is a major problem, both like within the field and within academia. And I think that would be something that would be very interesting to your students. So I'd look into that. And again, also check out the Dollop episode. Or no, this was Behind the Bastards, one of the two. I can't remember which podcast it was, but it was, you know, Charles Koch, the Luke Skywalker of rich people. Just listen to that 2-part episode.
I like it. Yeah, I guess. I mean, my big thing about economics is always just that, like, I think that there's a lot of, I think a lot of people with a lot of different positions work backwards from what they want to be true politically to what they believe is true about economics, and I will both sides that, because I think that, like, some people on the left are like very quick to assume that like MMT is the final truth about everything because it tells them what they want to hear. And of course, the much more common thing is for, you know, like libertarians and conservatives to embrace, you know, the a priori assumptions of the Austrian economics because it tells them what they want to hear. You have equivalence throughout, and I think lots of these models might, you know, like, they're abstract models for how an economy might work, and lots of them probably do map onto aspects of the complicated, messy reality. But like, my big thing is always just that, like just, I don't know, I want to see, I'm always much more impressed by economic arguments that have evidence attached to them. Like, you know, like we tried this economic policy and here's what happened, and, you know, all these cases, than by sort of reasoning from first principles. Which I think there's like way too much of in a lot of economics.
Mm-hmm. Which ironically mirrors your criticism of a lot of academia, where people are like trying to argue purely in the realm of the theoretical as opposed to the realm of the empirical. This also, by the way, Ben, this reminded me of something that I wanted to bring up, but then I just forgot it. So keep talking and I'll remember.
Okay. Lance plays LOL, says excess of democracy equals trilateral commission reasoning. Also, LOL, capitalism's cut poverty 50%. Actual cherry picking World Bank's stats, pinker garbage, which is absolutely right. I actually do regret this, that it went by very quickly that he said the thing about poverty statistics, and I had the thought, oh, I should like bring that back up, and then I just never did. But there's a old segment on this on the Michael Brooks show, memorable, you know, you can still find the video on YouTube, memorably called Steven Pinker caught being a stinker on poverty stats, and there was also a good, I do not agree with those guys on everything, but Citations Needed has some very good episodes, and they had one about this. They had a whole episode about it. There was sort of a deep dive into some of the stats about poverty, and basically it depends on what measure you're using, but if you use the poverty, is defined as like under $2 a day, then the percentage of people in poverty has declined. But that's the percentage. The actual number of people living on below $2 a day has increased. It's just that the world population has increased more. 2, the overwhelming majority of the percentage gain in the last several decades has been concentrated in one country, China, that I don't think is anybody's model of a free market. And 3, the World Bank itself says that $5 a day is a more reasonable measure. And if you go by the $5 a day measure, then most of these poverty gains disappear. So yeah, I mean, I don't, and I mean, like, and also sure, some of the most extreme forms of poverty are going to decline as people who were rural peasants. They live in societies that develop, and they kind of go from living very rudimentary conditions, etc. But the jump from you're trying to live off less than $2 a day or even less than $5 a day to you're actually not in poverty anymore by any more sane definition is an entirely different thing. There's much less evidence that just development alone accomplishes that. I mean, the country that I'm most familiar with that actually did manage to make the leap from the developing world to the first world is South Korea, I would point out that South Korea has a very large militant labor movement, and 2, they historically a lot of the reason they were able to make that jump was that they were a rare example of a developing country that was actually allowed to use protectionist policies to build up their native industries, which they didn't they didn't get a Henry Kissinger sort of response to that because they were they were seen as such a crucially important anti-communist ally that the generals who ran South Korea back then had more room to maneuver, and they ignored their Western economic advisors and said, yeah, you're not a real country if you don't make your own cars. We're gonna do some protectionism. So I think the actual history of the decline of third world poverty is, yeah, I completely agree with you.
This actually makes sense because you talked about in the debate with you talked about Norway, and there's a great video, Economics Explained, on YouTube. Go look it up, by like a standard liberal economist, where they're talking about Norway, nationalizing their oil. And Norway, of course, was not suddenly on the beatdown of an American attack, either economic or otherwise, because Norway was part of NATO, and it was part of the world that America wanted to defend. And so like the average Norwegian is something like, if you're born in Norway, you start off like with like $250,000 basically. As if you had $250,000 in your bank account because of this nationalized oil in Norway. But some other country that is not part of NATO, that the United States is not interested in supporting, you nationalize your oil, and looks like X country needs some freedom. So I thought that was actually, to bring it back to the debate, I thought that was a really, really good point for you to bring up, particularly with regard to Venezuela. Specifically because Venezuela, in a lot of ways, is suffering from the paradox of plenty. Like, this is an economy where just about everything is concentrated heavily in the oil industry. And of course, when the price of oil drops, Venezuela doesn't do so well. The same thing happened with Russia, but nobody talks about it because Russia is capitalist these days.
Yeah. Russia hasn't even right. Venezuela is certainly capitalist, but it has a socialist party in power and uses a lot of socialist rhetoric. So it was easy for them to draw this connection that didn't really make sense given the facts on the ground. And and that's also all compatible with saying that, sure, like, I have no problem saying that the Maduro government made lots of decisions that that exacerbated the problem and that dug themselves in deeper, and that could all be true. I mean, I have no I'm not emotionally invested in saying that, like, this particular government did no wrong and is blameless, but like you can't you just, it doesn't make sense to blame socialism because, like, even if you just have the most minimalistic ass kind of Republican socialism is when government does stuff definition, like, even by that definition, Venezuela is vastly less socialist than Norway. It's less socialist than France, never mind Norway. Even by that definition, never mind on the totally new economic system based on workers' control sort of definition.
I think 1,000 tankies just cried out in anger and were silenced.
That explains my headache.
Yoda, thank you for the super chat. Says the SCOTUS, yes, this going back to our Florida 2000 discussion, makes judicial coup. Now U.S. elections are unquestionable because the right is authoritarian. I feel like I'm going mad. Yeah, I mean, I really like on this point what Shahid Buttar said when he was on the show, which is that, even though nobody ever talks about it in these terms, the U.S. Supreme Court should be seen as having a legitimacy crisis because crucial justices were appointed by a president who lost an election, was appointed by the Supreme Court.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you don't want to take away his constitutional right to be president.
Let's see. Okay. We've run through the super chats that are showing up here, but you have more screenshots of super chats from earlier?
I think there were only 3, if I remember correctly.
Okay.
So I think we hit them all.
Okay.
The 2 I caught and the 1 I missed.
Okay. Fair enough. If we did miss any, let us know in the last couple minutes here, and we'll get to them. But I think
that reminds me of what I wanted to talk about. Actually, I'm sorry to interrupt you, Ben. This was so I had made a super chat because Tjump at the very beginning of the debate had objected to you making your point about like capitalism not being the only system that humans could, and Francis Fukuyama very famously said capitalism is the end of history. Liberal capitalism. So like I had made a super chat and I don't know if that was actually read. I had a 3-year-old distracting me, so I might have missed it, but James might have also forgotten about it and tell me if he did, because if he did, he owes me $5. But like that is a standard part of capitalist rhetoric, that capitalism is the best system that we can ever have. And TDM, 1, didn't seem to be aware of that. And 2, seemed to push back on your opening statement with regard to that. So that was what I wanted you to address specifically.
Yeah, I think James did miss that one. But yeah, you're right, because Tjump did say that nobody says that, right? Or at least he said, who's saying,
It's a key part of capitalist rhetoric that this is the best and only system we can have.
Yeah, like that actually did make. I mean, as much as like I think that he, I think he was being, I think he was being fairly obnoxious in some ways that got to be obviously the debate. But like but one thing that I think stepping back from that did make him an interesting interlocutor for this is that he was not saying that, and he wasn't even like that like most people who want to do debates to defend capitalism are either centrists or libertarians, and he didn't seem to be either of those things. He seemed to be willing to acknowledge that social democratic countries were some of the most humane and livable societies, that have existed so far. And he seemed to even be leaving the door open a crack for the idea that at some point in the future, development of AI to solve calculation problems, etc., God knows, maybe he was willing to acknowledge that we could have some sort of socialism. Then he just seemed to think that that right now any sort of move toward socialism would make things worse, which is obviously not a position I find very compelling, but it's an unusual position for people who do these debates to take. So that alone made him kind of interested.
So socialism for robots, but not for people.
Yeah, well, it's Tjump. I have the suspicion that he would prefer a society of robots and not people.
Vinny, thank you for the super chats. Can you explain how the survivor fallacy has been asserted? Yeah, I can explain what I thought he was saying, and then I could explain what I got out of his clarification. If either of you guys understood this differently, feel free to jump in. But initially, I thought that his point about survivorship bias was that worker co-ops that like still exist are like the better, more efficient ones. So they're not like representative of worker co-ops as a whole, because like most of them will go out of business. That's what I thought he was saying. But then when I responded to that, it seemed like he clarified that's not quite what he was saying, that he was just using survivorship bias as an example of how something can be cherry picking, even if it's like an overall average.
So this is my one actual criticism of you during the debate, unless I missed it, by the way, because, by the way, the entire time I was watching this debate, I had a 5-year-old putting on various costumes and telling me to, So he's right now pretending to be Hilda from the Netflix series, and it looks awesome. But what I noticed with regard to co-ops that you didn't challenge him on, and I thought this would have been a very good way to specifically challenge this argument, is that co-ops are not able to attract the kind of investment dollars right now that traditional firms are able to attract, both because markets have a predisposition towards what has been successful previously in a market, monkey see, monkey do. We know that they have this bias, but also because like investors are simply less likely to invest in less profitable enterprises. So if you have a business that serves its community and serves its workers much better financially than necessarily a capitalist firm, you will have less investment dollars coming from investors, because obviously less money is being extracted from that business to give to people on the stock market. And as a result, they're going to have a lot more capital to invest to go to outlast their competitors, even though if we look at this specific co-op in question, they're providing a superior service and they are providing a superior experience for the people that work for them. So I think the very essence of capitalism, because it favors the investor class over the worker class and over the consumer class, is naturally going to favor an extractionary model as opposed to to steal an anarchist term, a more mutualist model where everyone benefits. And I feel like that was one thing that I saw unsaid throughout the debate, unless, of course, my son just pulled on my shirt at the time and I missed it.
I did.
Yeah, Ben did touch on that. I did want to say I think part of what he was trying to say with the whole survival fallacy or whatever was that he's thinking like businesses is the group and you're just pulling out the co-ops as part of the larger group, and that's how you're cherry picking.
Yeah.
I guess. I mean, so again, it's a weird thing, because if what he means is what I understood initially, that like that you're looking at the co-ops that survived, then it just doesn't make any sense, because it's like, yeah, sure, currently existing co-ops are the ones that survive. Currently existing regular businesses are the ones that survive. Most businesses don't. Like right now, if anybody, an individual sole proprietor, a group of workers going to go up, anybody, like if you start a restaurant tomorrow, more likely than not, it's not going to exist in 5 or 10 years. Right? Most businesses fail. But so that doesn't seem to be a disanalogy. In fact, at least the stats I've seen, the study, I know there's one from the University of Leeds, is that, again, fewer co-ops are started, but the ones that are started seem to, it's a lower birth rate. It's not a higher death rate.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, I did touch a little bit on what you're saying, not quite the way you said it, but like it's that, yeah, obviously, I mean, a co-op just can't not the only way, right? But one important way that a capitalist corporation raises money is the initial public offering, that they can sell little pieces of the company, and then those people who own those little pieces can buy and sell to each other. And a co-op definitionally can't do that, right? If there are outside people who own pieces of it, it is to that extent not a co-op. It's not owned by the workers anymore. Now it's owned by capitalists. And so that's one thing. Another thing is that working class people really are a bigger repayment risk for bank loans, than people who have more means, to start with. Another thing is, Tjump actually kind of said this at one point, although I don't think he would obviously draw a different conclusion from it, but that we live in a society, we live in a system where one of the options is that you can be a capitalist, that you can be your own boss. So if you could be the boss, right? Of course, most people who try to become the boss won't succeed. Most businesses fail, but you're probably going to fail one way or the other. So if it's an option, sure, most people in those circumstances are just going to go for broke and, go. It's like the prisoner's dilemma. They'll go for the even though they might be more likely to be successful, if you pool together your resources with others, the incentives of the system, trying for the best option for you individually, the chances aren't that much greater that you'll succeed anyway. It's about it's going to be about the same. So it's most people aren't going to scrimp and sweat and risk whatever little money they have in an effort to start a new business. And if you are willing to make that leap, you're probably going to try to just be a regular capitalist instead of trying to share power with others. But but the whole point, to my mind, is that you shouldn't have to do that in order to have power at the workplace. Those shouldn't be your choices. That you can either give up 10 years of your life working 18 hours a day trying to get a business off the ground, or just deal with regular workplace authoritarianism. That it's unreasonable for those to be the choices. I don't see any reason to force that on people. And of course, your point, Brent, does go to why we didn't really get into this in the debate at all, because we never really got into this level of detail. But this is why I think that even if you think that the kind of socialism that could exist right now at this level of technology, etc., as somebody in the chat put it, if the robots were that advanced, you could almost skip over socialism into what, if anybody's ever read the Ian Banks culture novels, that sort of system, that basically we're just the pets of advanced artificial intelligence. We have all of our needs met that way. But yeah, given current levels of technology, if you think that the kind of socialism we could have right now would still involve some market mechanisms or whatever, I do still think you'd have to at least socialize finance, right? For all the reasons that you're talking about, Brent. So that you have, so that instead of having to just go to a regular bank that has the option to give it to you or give it to a regular capitalist business, or having to attract investors, that the seed money, for new ventures comes from publicly owned banks. So it equalizes that out, and then as a matter of policy, you could only give it, to firms where workers had democratic rights on the shop floor, and that's so yeah. I think you have to. I think even with market socialism, you'd have to at least nationalize the banks.
Yeah, I would agree 100%. I think you kicked ass in this debate, Ben. Really, I think that out of a lot of your other debates, you managed to really control the playing field of the debate. And, obviously people who are biased are going to say one thing or the other, but I felt like this was a very, very strong showing.
Thank you for that.
I felt guilty about how bad you beat that guy, so I just subscribed to his page and followed him on social media.
Oh, have fun. I will tell you guys, Tjump, honestly, I do like Tjump personally. I think a lot of his takes are terrible. But you know, the very first debate I ever had with him was with him and a Malaysian Christian who had become a Southern Baptist, and me, a Western guy who was, you know, in the areas surrounded by Southern Baptists who became a Buddhist. And it was ironically a very good conversation. So I don't think Tjump is completely lost, but I do think he's kind of fallen down the chud rabbit hole for a little bit. And it's due to unexamined issues that became very clear in this.
Like cherries.
Yeah. I mean, I guess somehow or another, the survivorship thing was supposed to be like, I think this was his clarification. It was supposed to show that you could be cherry picking, even if you're looking at entire categories. I think it was supposed to be an analogy for that. I still think it's missing what cherry picking means, right? I mean, like, I think he was kind of using that to mean that the sample size isn't big enough or something. About which I would say, look, let's say the sample size of worker co-ops isn't big enough. Great. Then how about this as a compromise? We have, as a matter of government policy, we try to expand the worker cooperative sector like 10 or 20-fold. And so it's actually a large percentage of the economy. It would still be a minority, but it'd be a large percentage. And then we could have a more scientific test. I'd be interested to see if Tjump would go for that.
I mean, you're familiar with Italy, right? With how they run worker co-ops, and they, if you're on unemployment, you and a group of friends can get a government grant to start your own co-op, and you know. That tends to work out pretty well for people.
The Emilia-Romagna region of Italy, which is also something that Jeremy Corbyn was talking about, you know, doing something modeled on that in the UK, which is going to be you know, one of the more heartbreaking things about the last couple of years, that you know that didn't happen because. You know, if there are a lot of, I mean, this goes back to the point about intervention, government, about like foreign intervention, that if, that like, it's one thing for a left government to be elected in Peru or, you know, Ecuador or Bolivia or, you know, someplace like this, where they immediately have, you know, the most powerful empire in the history of the world, you know, breathing down their necks. I think like you know, like a powerful developed country like the UK, it could be a very different story. They could accomplish a lot more, you know. So I mean, and this is, and you know, Corbyn was like a real, you know, and he wasn't, you know, he wasn't talking about completely eliminating capitalism or anything, but I mean, Corbyn was certainly to the left of any like normal social democratic, you know, party that exists in most European countries. So I mean, that's going to be a what could have been, you know, that's going to be a hot time. But yeah, so yeah, no, yeah, I don't have a, like I said, I think there's some things about Tjump's perspective that are more interesting than other people who like to do this debate topic. Which actually, I think I missed one last super chat. I don't know if this is fair, but in any case, I think he had a perspective that was a little bit different, and that was interesting to engage with. I do think that he, I think he'd have more productive conversations if he chilled out a little bit, and I think that he, and also, frankly, like, you know, if you're going to debate somebody who's a big apologist for capitalism, you know, you should like know some Econ 101 terms. You're going to be a little embarrassed if you don't. If you're going to debate a socialist, you should look into some of the research on worker co-ops, and you should probably find out who Salvador Allende was.
Yeah. You know, that was like the weirdest thing for me too, because I'd gotten involved with Occupy Wall Street and I hadn't been aware of what happened to Allende. And I remember, like, in New York, I watched Naomi Klein's The Shock Doctrine. It was like 2 a.m. And I got through that, and it's very important, like, because Naomi Klein came to Occupy. Like, she talked to us. She warned us against becoming sectarian, and hey, we became sectarian, as do most, leftist groups.
Sure.
But like, the take was absolutely foundational for me. Like that documentary, anybody who wants to see like how anarchism might work in practice, how socialism might work in practice, go watch that. And I watched her specifically, like I watched her the shock doctrine, and I remember like just the hit that came to me upon realizing like what had happened to Allende, what had been done by the U.S. government supposedly on my behalf. Now, it wasn't really my behalf; it was the behalf of the ruling class, and just like I was close to weeping into the sink at 2 a.m. because I had grown up really thinking like my family had, emigrated later than slavery. We hadn't had a lot of the very negative legacies we were associated in the North. And then you find out that like the frickin' U.S. government with the CIA went down and basically engineered this coup that killed a man who had been rightfully and lawfully elected, and imposed this system of economics on a country that didn't want it, that resulted in a ridiculous amount of carnage. And for what? So we can have the freaking, so we can have the Cheesecake Factory down the street, and we can have another Cheesecake Factory a little further. It is horrifying. And to really bring it back to that, like the coup was the generation next coup.
Yeah.
Like, you really got to think about like how vapid and stupid a lot of the stuff that the United States government has done and that has been done to preserve capitalism is to preserve like exactly what.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If you want a good recommendation, Carlos Reyes, who is a Chilean comic book writer, has a graphic novel that is not available yet in English, but German, Spanish, French, and Korean, if I remember correctly. So if you speak one of those, Last Days of Allende is the English translated title. So like it's like I don't speak Spanish, so no habla español for the title.
September 11th, 1973 is when that coup happened, which is one of my favorite Bhaskar Sankara tweets in a long time. Somebody said something about what would have prevented 9/11. He said if Allende had armed the workers, but
Quite possibly
different 9/11. But but yeah, that Generation Next coup thing is an amazing way to put it. I was in Cuba in 2013. I went to an academic conference at the University of Havana. And while I was there, I asked like a Cuban person one day. It's like okay, it's something I've always been curious about. I think of like the like national drink of Cuba. It's like the Cuba Libre, right? It's like rum, Coke, and lime. But how do you make that here, right? Because like no Coca-Cola, right? I mean, it's the embargo. And he said, okay, first of all, sir, the national drink is not the Cuba Libre; it's the mojito. But secondly, and then he gave me a can of this stuff called Two Cola, which is exactly like it tastes exactly like Coke. It's just like I'm sure it's just the old nationalized Coca-Cola factory is still churning it out, and it looks like Coke. It's hilarious, but it's like that's why all those people in Chile had to die. So it's like they'd be drinking Pepsi instead of drinking two Pepsi or whatever, whatever it would have been called, if they'd done the cyber sign, economic planning and all of that.
And not to let Coca-Cola off the leash or off the hook, because they actually was involved with a indigenous massacre in South America, and I'm blanking on which country, but so the cola wars are real, and it's happening in our hemisphere.
And it's so dumb. It's so incredibly dumb. You know, one of the things that popped into my head when the econ guy was talking about, and this doesn't have anything to do with econ, but it was just like, you know, what should I tell students about? You know, you should tell them about the Phoenix program. You know, you should tell them about Operation Condor. You should tell them about these times that the United States, which has spent so long casting itself as the world's savior, has done absolutely horrifying things that, and I'm not saying that other empires in our place would have done something better, because probably not, but you know, at the same time, you have to absolutely reckon with your past. You have to reckon with what we did to Vietnam. You have to reckon with what we have done to Latin America. And students of history need to be made aware of that. Whether you support the United States or you don't support the United States, if you are ignorant of history, if you are ignorant of what has come before, what's going to happen is that you are going to approach major socio-political, ecological problems like global warming, and you're not going to have an objective, effective stance to argue from. You're not going to be persuasive because you're going to be unaware. So yeah.
Yeah, I remember actually around the same time as that Cuba conference, I was in like, you know, my actual job was in you know, it was like a 1-year thing at a university in South Korea, and I remember right after I got it, going out with a group of people, included a Korean student who said, sort of conversationally, there was like a German like exchange student who was there, and the Korean guy said, sort of conversationally, it's like, oh, you know, Germans are fine with me, right? You know, I don't like, but you know, but I hate the Japanese because and the difference, he had a rationale worked out, is that, you know, is that Germany, you know, has apologized for what they did in World War II, and Japan has not. And I said, well, hey, I mean, if you're going to blame, you know, every Japanese person for that, you should hate me, right? I mean, look at what the United States did in Vietnam. I sure as hell never apologized for that. And the way, and his response was, oh, well, that is between you and Vietnam. That's not and like all I could think is like, it sounded like somebody who's like hearing domestic violence in the apartment next door is like, I'm sure there's another side to the story. You know, like,
well, what about Korea? I mean, you know, we still have bases in Korea, and terrible things happen on those bases all the time to women in wherever the base is. I don't know off the top of my head, and you know, that's a terrible thing that we should probably talk about, and how you know, U.S. involvement in Korea.
Yeah, I mean, Korean public opinion is very split on this. This guy's probably you know, a supporter of U.S. you know, presence, but but also, by the way, I mean, as funny as it was in a kind of dark way for him to say that, you know, like it's also just objectively wrong. You know, the South Korean, you know, military dictatorship actually was helping, you know, the United States, you know, war effort in Vietnam. But in any case, we have been on the stream has been on for 3 hours and 19 minutes. This is
holy shit.
For the sake of everybody's sanity, we should call it a night. Thank you so much, guys. This was very short notice, and this is a super fun discussion. So really appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Ben.
Thank you, Ben.
All right. Left is best.